Good morning. If you would, go ahead and take your seats and we'll get started. Am I supposed to do this? All right. Well, thank you to everyone for being here. And don't forget, we are being live streamed on YouTube because we have so many fans of Workforce Work, and they are tuning in to see what we have in store for them today. I do want to start by thanking and making everyone aware that Mr. Warren Logan, who's been a board member for quite some time, he submitted his resignation. He was the chair of the operations committee as well, and so he served the state very well in that role. And unfortunately, he's resigned, but we've accepted that resignation and really just want to acknowledge and thank Warren for his years of service and dedication to the board. Kevin Vaughn is, I mentioned he was Warren was the chair of the Innovation Committee. I said that wrong. So Kevin Vaughn, who was the vice chair, is stepping into that chairman role. And so we'll look forward to him taking on that leadership. So thank you to Warren and thank you to Kevin for their service in those roles. We have a fun agenda today, but let's start it off with roll call. Eiler, you want to help us out with that?
Good morning. Martha Axford. Here. Senator Paul Bailey. Commissioner Daniel Barnes.
Proxy.
Jason Bates. Here. Tim Berry.
Here.
Representative Clark Boyd.
Present by proxy, Sarah Miller.
Ronnie Brewer.
Here.
Kevin Brooks. Here. Michelle Falcone.
Here.
Ben Ferguson.
Present by proxy, Jason Bates.
Bill Godwin.
Here.
Marshall Graves.
Here.
Ann Hatcher. Here. Christine Hopkins.
Here.
Jeff McCord.
Here.
Vonda McDaniel.
Here.
E.L. Morton.
Here.
Tony Nicknajad. Greg Persinger.
Here.
Stuart Price.
Here.
Bob Rolfe.
Proxy, Ian Thompson.
Penny Schwinn. Kevin Vaughn.
Proxy, Linda Maddox.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. All right, if you had a chance to look over the minutes, I would entertain a motion to accept those minutes as presented. To help me out, I can't see everybody around the table, so if you're making a motion, just say your name when you make the motion or your name when you make the second, and that way Eiler can grab it for the minutes and I can see who said what. Sometimes I can't always see who makes those motions. So anybody want to make a motion to accept the minutes from the last meeting?
Move to approve minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Second? Ronnie? Okay.
There you go, Ronnie.
Get her in there. All right. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes from the last meeting as presented, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those are approved as presented. All right, and you have a guest with you today. Why don't you tell us who that is and introduce her to the board?
Hi, good morning.
Morning.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, perfect. So my name is Ann Thompson. I'm with ECD. I am very grateful to Chairman and to the Department of Labor for allowing Riley the opportunity to do a presentation. She is our intern from the IDEAL program. ECD started working with IDEAL and Next Steps programs in 2017, so she is our 5th intern to come through. And one of the things that we do at ECD is a lot of presentations, and so this is a great opportunity for her to practice that skill set. She has a presentation in store that tells you more about the program, and then we'd be happy to answer any questions afterwards. Oh, sorry, and here's the clicker. And she took the pictures.
All right.
My name is Riley Hoag. I am presenting a PowerPoint on my internship with the Tennessee government. I grew up in Dallas, Texas, and then I moved to Arizona, and I live in Nashville. Hobbies, I love photography, golf, and playing drums. My future job interest is social media. Education background, I went to New Way Academy in Arizona. I took some online classes for college, and I recently go to Lipscomb University in the IDEAL program. The classes I'm taking is Principles of Marketing, 21st Century Media, Web and Mobile Journalism, and Multimedia Storytelling. At Lipscomb, I've gotten to do great opportunities. One of them is Illumination Network. It's the student news website. So I've been taking photos for the sporting events, intramurals for indoor soccer, and Singorama, which is a news, it's like a school-wide event for people who can dance and sing on stage. Recently, I've done some designs for a friend at school, and I designed a logo for her. And then she used one of my photos for a song cover, and then I created a website for her. And then for the state government internship, the rotations are DIDD, ECD, Department of Education, and Office of the Governor.
I also have a shameless plug. She is looking for a summer internship. She might be coming back to ECD. We're working on it, but she's open to other opportunities, and she also has a lot of classmates who are open to other opportunities. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it.
Riley, thank you. Good work. Appreciate you sharing your experience with us, and Ann, thank you for bringing her to the board and giving her the opportunity to speak. I want to go over just a few highlights from the strategy meeting that we had in December. I know some of you were there, but some of you were not able to make it. So we submitted, after the strategy meeting, we submitted a letter to the governor just to give him some highlights of what we were focusing on. And I wanted to share what those were. I'm going to share them differently than what we put in the letter, but a different perspective, a different way of wording helps with redundant learning, because redundancy is the key to learning. I'll say that again, redundancy is the key to learning. And so just a different way of saying the same thing. So help me out there. Do I need to flip me up? Okay, yeah, that'd be great. All right, so the first thing we talked about was building efficiency. And so this is one of the focuses that we talked about that said we want to make sure that we are collaborating better with all the workforce partners. At the meeting, we had different folks from different departments share how they interact with the State Workforce Development Board, and it was great presentations. And one of the common goals that we said was, how is it that we're working better together? We want to make sure that we integrate the workflow systems. A lot of the technology that the different departments use does not necessarily talk well with each other. And so we want to have a goal of integrating those systems so that the workflow is a little more efficient and that those systems are talking with each other. And then we want to make sure that if one department is working on a set of tasks, they're not overlapping with work that another department is doing. So we're not duplicating effort, or that work that one department is doing isn't in conflict with what another group is doing. So those are the kinds of things we talked about to make things more efficient and make sure that all the different cogs in the wheel of workforce development are working well together. All right, and then next, we said we want to eliminate some barriers. So one of the problems is that we've got all these great programs, but the participants don't know that those resources are available. So we wanted to make sure that we're doing a better job of getting those resources out in front of the folks to whom they can best benefit. And we talked about different ways to do that and set that as one of our goals. And then obviously by doing that, that improves the volume of participants that can participate in the programs. A lot of the resources that we have available, they can only handle so many folks in the program. We just want to make sure that if we're marketing the resources to participants, that the organizations can handle the extra volume that hopefully will come with more people taking advantage of the resources. All right, next. Then we said, well, what areas should we focus on? Well, what does Tennessee need, right? Is it manufacturing? Is it service industries, tourism? What are the things that Tennessee has the biggest need for? And we should be intentional about focusing on those programs, whether it's through vocational or reentry programs. Let's train those folks in the way that Tennessee has the most demand for those jobs. And then we wanted relevant measurements. So we want to create dashboards of KPIs that tell the related story. There's a ton of data out there that we can glean, but what story does it tell? How are we making sure that the data that we have in front of us is being used to make the timely decisions and that we're holding folks accountable? And by creating these common goals and creating comparisons to say, here's where we want the program to be, and here's where it is, and here's the gap that we need to fill that to get to the goal we need, then we can set those goals here at the state level. The local boards can have those same goals. We can have those shared set of common goals, and we're all working toward the same objectives. So those were some of the things that we talked about. Was there anything else on my deck? Oh yeah, and we got to make it user-friendly. We can't make it so complicated the participants can't use it, right? That it's got to be easy to access. If everybody has phones these days, for a lot of people, that is their internet connection. They don't necessarily have internet connection at home, and so their phone is the place that they connect to the rest of the world, and that's where the opportunity is for them to have access to programming and resources and hearing about those. So we've got to make it user-friendly for them to be able to do that from their phone or whatever connections they have available, and for the largest number of participants. It's one thing to make it simple, but if we can't put it out there to a big group of folks, it doesn't do any good. So we've got to make it high volume and easily accessible. I think that's what we talked about. So those are the things in not so many words and certainly more concise in the letter to the governor, but those were the things that we focused on. The strategy session was really strong and really productive, and I appreciate everybody who participated in that. Does anybody who was there have any other comments? Did I leave anything out of the overview? Any questions? Asking local boards to do things. Hopefully they are around these topics. If we're asking the staff to work on projects, hopefully they're around these topics and supporting those objective. So, any other questions about that? All right, thanks for your time. Commissioner McCord, what would you like to tell us?
If it's okay, I think I'm going to stand up.
Yeah, please.
First of all, thank you for you all being here. If I knew there were going to be so many people, I would have worn a tie. So it's a little surprise. I actually got a hard time about that from Ivan, so about not wearing a tie. But it doesn't mean I'm not glad you're here. I'm here to talk about the vision of this board and how it aligns with not just the workforce pieces that the board oversees, but also the workforce pieces that maybe our state, our higher ed, or anything that's outside of the purview of this board, including what is inside the purview of this board. So one of the things that we have done over the last year is we know that we have to, if we're going to make progress, we have to execute as a system, not as a collection of individual parts, but as a workforce development system. And so what we've done is we formed, under the governor's leadership, we formed what we call the Workforce Development System Steering Team. And you can see who sits around that table for the state. And so this was so from that, we developed, and we'll look at that in just a second, a common strategy with common goals and common metrics and common accountability, so that when the governor asks us, how is workforce development being done, then we can have an answer, not 7 or 8 different answers. So we formed that, and by the way, this is not much different than you would do a commercialization project, a big commercialization project in industry, or a big process improvement across several different plants that you have. So multidisciplinary teams working with accountability and milestones and goals and all that kind of really boring stuff that actually makes things happen. And so if we go, so this is the strategy that we have at a high level with some assumptions. And our first assumption was that we have to execute as a system if we're going to make progress. Second one is we have to do all 4 of these things if we're going to be premier workforce development system. And finally, if we do all that and we act as a system and we make things happen, then we're going to be the best in the country. So those are our assumptions that we're working under. And not only does this align with the vision of this board, it integrates very well with the vision of this board. And so where are we now? We got a cool graphic, we got a common strategy, and now we're in the monotony of actually making progress. And so what that looks like is leaders from this group meet monthly. It surprised the legislature when I said that, but we meet monthly and we review the projects from our strategy that are going out, and it's exciting. We had our first project review meeting yesterday, and I think what we'll see here very shortly is being able to talk about really major advances in work-based learning, major advances in integration of higher education into correctional institutions, apprenticeships out of those correctional institutions. But again, we're not going to get there without the work, even if we have the cool graphic and the really nice. I did that all by myself, by the way. This one, that was, I did it all by myself. And so even with that, we're going to be the constant drumbeat, and hopefully the first one really that launched out of that was our Apprenticeship TN effort. But as we move along, hopefully as we come and give updates, I'll be able to tell you about products and advances that we're actually making. So anyway, that's just a quick update of what we're doing, how we're integrating all the folks who sit around that table with all the folks that sit around this table. And again, thank you for being here. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Commissioner McCord. I appreciate that. That's good work. And the Apprenticeship Tennessee program is certainly a good example of production coming out of that effort, so thank you. Deputy Commissioner Thomas, the never fun but always necessary bylaw updates.
Yes, Chairman, I have the popular part of the agenda. So as this board has really transcended into the work that's before us today, we found it necessary to make some modifications to the current bylaws. These are not fairly comprehensive changes. They're just changes that were needed to ensure that the work of the board maintains compliance with not just what's outlined under WIOA, but also outlined under state practice. So if I can call the board members' attention, the bylaws are in your packet. I will note that all changes have been identified in red. And on page 3, which begins the modifications, in section 3 of page 3, in the former version of the bylaws, it was required that any board member who wished to resign would notify the commissioner of this department. It has since been modified to add "and the State Workforce Development Board Chair." So our process should include any board member wishing to resign should notify the commissioner and the State Workforce Board Chair. And so that language was added in section 3. In section 6 of the same page, we've also added the language that allows members of the board to receive reimbursement for travel expenses based on state travel guidelines. Again, the board has always been able to receive reimbursement for travel, but it was necessary to add this language specifically in line with our state finance and administration. So that has been added in section 6. And on the bottom of page 3, you'll see there's some footnotes that have been added. This language is also to clarify what optimum decision-making authority is, as well as identify what we mean around documented leadership, et cetera. As you know, in this section, if a board member is required to have optimal decision-making authority, and the proxy that comes in their stead is also required to have similar qualifications. So that has been clarified in the footnote at the bottom of page 3. The next change is on page 5, section 6. And again, this section addresses absentees of board members. Currently, if a board member misses 2 consecutive board meetings, they're notified by the department. 3 consecutive board meeting absentees, either in person or by proxy, will automatically require a board member to resign. In that, there is an allowance that if a board member is ill or has extenuating circumstances, those absentees can be excused by the chairperson of the board only. And so that language has been added, that any member requesting to have an excused absence must notify the State Workforce Board Chair in person. In addition, there has been an allowance for those members who serve us in the House and Senate would not be subject to automatic removal, because obviously when they're in active legislative session, it just duty calls. It doesn't allow them to be here, so they will often send a proxy. And so that allowance has been added in section 6 as well. And lastly, in the bottom of page 5 begins the change that gives the State Workforce Board Chair the authority to establish work groups that comprise both members and non-members as sees fit based on the requirements of this board. So in plain speak, if there is a work group that the chairman determines needs to be stood up, and perhaps it includes reentry, it would allow the State Workforce Board Chair to bring in individuals who do not serve on this board, but may have expertise in the reentry space. And so that was allowed as well. That change continues at the top of page 6. But Mr. Chairman, those are the changes. This will require board approval, and I will turn it back over to the chairman for the vote.
Okay, so before we ask for a motion, are there any questions for Deputy Commissioner Thomas? That's a lot of changes. I appreciate you putting them in plain language so that they're easy to understand for us. All right, I'll entertain a motion to accept the bylaws changes as presented. Okay, thank you. And a second? Okay. Did you capture that? Michelle was the second. All right, any discussion? All right, all of those who are okay with accepting the bylaw changes as presented, say aye. And those opposed, same sign. The bylaw changes are accepted. Okay, moving on. Assistant Commissioner Lovett, what do you have for us today?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. Two quick things before I get into my presentation. Just notes about our engagement with the board. First, Stuart Price was gracious enough to allow us to take him on a tour of the mobile AJC and also one of our American Job Centers. It was a great dialogue. Stuart actually went through the process as though he was signing up to be a participant, and hopefully you had a good experience from that. But what we learned from it was the feedback from the board was extremely great and it helps us think about how we can improve. Two, it's one that we know that maybe we should formalize this into programming for any board member who seeks to want to come and learn more about what we do at the ground level, that we encourage and invite all board members, if you want to take a tour of the American Job Center and our mobile American Job Center, we would love to have you to learn and also to give us feedback. And three, it was, Stuart, very inspiring for the entire team to see that level of engagement. It just connects us better to the board so we can support you in what you do. So I wanted to commend you on that and thank you for allowing us the opportunity to serve you that way. Second, and Ronnie's going to probably throw something at me, but I had to mention it because you mentioned it to me in the hallway. Ronnie will be doing a TED Talk tomorrow at Crosstown in Memphis on workforce. So those of you in the Memphis area, please, if you can, visit Crosstown tomorrow and support Ronnie, and hopefully we can get some good photos. But definitely want to highlight when our state board members are ambassadors for the workforce system and great representations of what we've been able to do in Tennessee. So Ronnie, congratulations, and I know you'll, break a leg? Yeah, break a leg tomorrow, so. Not really, right. So next we'll go into the 2020-2024 state workforce, workforce state plan for Tennessee. You all should have received the draft that has gone through the full public comment period. There were some comments made and feedback, but minimal, and you should have a record of that as well. But ultimately, we are on track to have this submitted to the federal government by our March 2nd deadline, pending approval from this unit as well as a signature from the governor. Shortly after that, we will, in the coming days or weeks, we will issue out guidance for the regional and local plans to be developed in alignment with what the state plan has stated. Just one thing that we've determined is for feedback for the board, I think you received regional and local plans in a May timeframe, and there was a lot of questions. Some were pushed back to represent and or present again maybe at a later board member meeting because it wasn't quite prepared, or there were some questions that maybe we should have put in front of you to answer before we presented. So our goal now is that the regional and local plans will be presented in the August board meeting to give our local areas more time and also to give you time to see a full presentation. Also that the plans, if you'll notice, are reflective of the vision of the governor and the commissioner as the commissioner presented to the group. Also, it's reflective of what this board expressed during the planning session. And I've got the cool graphic. By the way, you'll probably get tired of seeing that graphic in the coming weeks, but we love it, and it just shows the great representation of what our governor has put in place, which is we are one Tennessee. All our agencies should work together to help Tennessee, and so we're really proud of that graphic. And did you take credit for that, Commissioner? Or? Not me. That's you? Okay, all right. But just a quick summary of some things that are in the state plan. It's a lot of pages. A lot of different agencies have contributed to that plan. One, this plan is in the context of low unemployment in a competitive labor market, which changes the context of the way workforce development is delivered, and you should see that reflected in all areas of the plan. It also is a highlight on the Tennessee's workforce development system that the commissioner mentioned, that this is a collaborative effort that we want to do moving forward so that resources are there when Tennesseans need it. And again, going back to connectivity, the Perkins Plan is actually done with this public commenting period and is ready for the governor and their board's review as well. And so we wanted to make sure both the Perkins Plan and the state plan for WIOA had a lot of interconnectivity. And you'll see, and if you haven't had a chance to look at the Perkins Plan, we can share that with you, but a special focus on priority populations, those students below the poverty line. What can we do together as a team to make sure that they get work experiences and they're more successful in their careers? And then also, and it was presented to the Operations Committee today, how do we ramp up youth services and make sure that that is much more robust? And what's really great about the effort now, coming from the education background, when you're dealing with issues, as we say, the community problems show up in the schools or the institutions. And so teachers, principals, faculty members are dealing with homelessness, food insecurity, poverty issues, while also trying to educate students. Sometimes they believe that's on the onus of them to provide that for the students. But if they just look outside of the classroom, outside of the institutions, there's the Department of Human Services, there's our departments and our agencies that can provide those services as well. So the great thing about this is that we want to make sure all Tennesseans are successful. So let's be there right at the moment when they need it versus those moments when they come through our door and they have multiple issues and it's really hard to solve. So the youth services piece is going to be a great part of our work moving forward. You'll also see great integration with vocational rehabilitation and also with TANF, how we leverage that to make sure those who come through our doors have those access to those resources as well. Regional industry engagement will be another great thing that we're moving forward with. And again, this is part of the commissioner and governor's work of making sure we've got connectivity to employers, integration with higher education, and also highlights on adult education and the innovation that they're moving forward. In a nutshell, those are some of the highlights that are in the plan. But Chairman, I want to hand this back over to you just to see if there are comments, and we are seeking a vote or an approval, hopefully, on the state plan to move forward to send it to the governor for his signature.
All right, any questions for Dr. Lovett? All right, I'll entertain a motion to accept submitting the state plan. Thank you. Thank you, Vonda, and a second by Christine. Capture that. All right, any discussion? All right, all in favor of submitting the state plan as presented, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We will submit the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so next, oh, we'll keep going.
Okay. Should never give me
No,
the
we got
microphone,
business out of the
Chairman.
way. Tell us more.
We want to mention, and you should have received a save the date for March 23rd. We're going to play a video first, and then I'll have a few comments afterwards. But Patrice, you want to? Okay. Thank you, Patrice. Ann's walking out, but ECD has what they call hype videos. Deputy Commissioner, our chairman has said we're going to call our sizzle reel. So that was our sizzle reel. This effort on March 23rd, and we want everyone's engagement in this event. This will include participation from the Assistant Secretary of Labor, along with his partners and other agencies, our governor, our commissioner, the commissioner's partners and fellow commissioners across the state, along with any other partners and stakeholders, will be here for this convening. This is specifically the unit of analysis from a researcher's term is going to be the county mayors and their critical role in the workforce system. We have invited all of them to participate, but this is an event to elevate their role, their value to the entire system, but to share with them the federal work that's going on that relates to them, the state work that's relating to them as well. It gives the governor an opportunity to have a great launch pad for 2020 moving forward on what exactly he means when he says we're going big on workforce, and he'll share that vision. And then it will finish off with 3 grand regions will break out into planning sessions with the county mayors, with the executive directors from the development districts, with our ECD partners and other partners in those regions to talk about what we need to do in workforce development to move forward, but more importantly, how our county mayors are critical to that overall effort. So we hope that you can make it. Please mark it in your calendars, and we look forward to seeing you there. The other thing I wanted to mention is that you've seen the Ernst & Young Project 1 presentation about where we were as a workforce system. Project 2 has begun, where this is diving deep into work of technical assistance to make sure we get there based on the findings that were presented by the Phase 1 project. It has a comprehensive governance structure to it, where we've included not only internal stakeholders in workforce services, but also our partners, local workforce board members, and others to be part of how this is going to be deployed. But we will keep you updated throughout the next 3 to 6 months on how this project's going and what's next after the Phase 2 project. We've gone through this, and Chairman Berry presented the board planning session follow-up, and again, we're excited about it, and we're ready to move forward with great efforts based on your guidance. And just an update, Chairman, and to the entire board, some things that have come from that conversation in December. Youth Services, our youth team has actually partnered with the Department of Ed in a very robust work-based learning activity that's helping those students below the poverty line or have the most barriers. But again, instead of having 2 or 3 different approaches or programs, why can't we combine with agencies and just create one robust program? Also in the reemployment space, we are having discussions on how we integrate our RECIA, the Reemployment Services and Eligibility Assessment, with our unemployment insurance team, so that when members come to an American Job Center and there are opportunities where we can speed up their process from being dislocated to employed by specific services, we want to make sure that we provide that in a much more robust way. And the federal government has provided great resources to do research for us and also to give us some technical assistance on how we can empower that. And then again, as the commissioner mentioned, there are several project charters that are going on across the state where we're leading efforts where multiple agencies, organizations are coming together on specific topics. I will say, and we discussed this yesterday in a larger meeting, that what we found often is that when we sit down together as agencies and talk about topics such as veteran transitions, we realize that we're offering almost identical services at the same time, but we have no idea that we're actually offering the exact same services. So laying that out as a team allows us to be much more comprehensive, much more intentional of making sure that we are managing our resources well, but delivering services that make a difference for that particular participant. So those are some great outcomes from what we're doing so far. And we also, through the Deputy Commissioner Thomas, she's forming work groups that support this board. And so you'll see there are 5 different units that will be made up of cross-agency stakeholders that will be a stronger support unit for each of our committees. For the Oversight Committee, there will be a fiscal and reporting team made up of cross-agency stakeholders, and also a joint monitoring and compliance team. While we're monitoring one thing for our area, why can't we also monitor other things while we're working with local workforce boards? And that is the vision for the Deputy Commissioner. On the Operations Committee, you'll see the American Job Centers is a group that will be working on Steward to the point of your visit, and I think what we can encourage other board members to do, we want to make sure that the customer experience at those American Job Centers is informed and advised by great minds that can make sure that we provide the best services possible. And you'll see there's an apprenticeship and work-based learning team as well. Last, the Innovations Committee will have support from a multi-agency group on data and performance that will be supporting this board as well. And then apprenticeship update. If you can't see it, you should have it in front of you. We were really surprised that our state legislators are highlighting and excited about apprenticeship TN. This was just a surprise, I believe, this weekend. That was in the paper that they're speaking to it. They're actually being ambassadors in the voice for what is really exciting about apprenticeships. I can say for our apprenticeship team, they are now totally overwhelmed with employers calling and apprentices and parents saying, I'm going to drag my kid by the ear, and where do I take him to get him an apprenticeship? So that is exactly what we wanted, and we want to make sure we keep the integrity of that program and make sure we carry forward the vision of the commissioner, that we expand apprenticeships in a major way. And just a small update on what's happened since, actually, really, we officially kind of launched it August, July, that there are 14 new programs that have been executed in apprenticeships. 17 I found out yesterday, so 3 more were added. And there are about 194 new apprentices that have been added to the state's system on apprenticeships, and $17 an hour is the average earning wage of those apprenticeships across the state. So kudos to Tyra Copas and Lynn Kirby for their work on apprenticeships. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Deputy Commissioner, for that vision for expanding it. We are coming up with some very creative ways in which apprenticeships are making a difference for all Tennesseans, and we're really excited about that effort. And that was it, Chairman. Any questions you have for me, but thank you for allowing me some time to present.
That was fantastic. Who has questions for Dr. Lovett?
Where are the apprenticeships?
The apprenticeships are across the state, really. So we have really strong coverage. Some are more developed than others. East Tennessee traditionally has the vast majority of the apprenticeships, but we're seeing expansion in Memphis and in Nashville, Middle Tennessee. Middle Tennessee actually has launched, many of the new apprenticeship programs are the largest that have ever been launched in Middle Tennessee before. So they're equitably being delivered across the state. It's a great question.
Ronnie, you had a question? That was my question. Okay.
Yes, and we're bringing on apprenticeship directors, regional directors for West and Middle. They have not been hired yet, so hopefully we can secure that in the coming weeks. So once we have someone there, Tyra essentially is the East region, but because she's the only one, East means Memphis.
East of the Mississippi.
East of the Mississippi. But I can't commend her enough of the great hard work she's done. If you call, and she will drive there and engage, and I think employers are seeing that we want to make sure that we're addressing a business need, and we want to support them in getting there. And the surprising thing is that existing employers who have apprenticeships already have been calling in droves because now they're finally glad Tennessee has a support mechanism for them. So again, Tyra, kudos to what you do. Yeah, we can share a map with the entire board as to the apprenticeships that are there, that are existing, and also the ones that are new that have emerged as well.
Can I say something really
Yeah.
quick?
Just some clarification. So that $17 entry-level wage inherent in an apprenticeship is as your competency goes up, so does your wages. So that wage will continue to grow and grow and grow and really become not only a living wage, but a prosperity wage as they continue to grow and learn and get that base of apprenticeships.
Yeah, very good. Any other questions? Excellent work. Love to see that progress. Thank you for that. So, all right. Ian White, are you ready to tell us about adult education?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So to build off of what Kenyatta had provided about the state plan, there's a adult ed specific portion that has to be addressed. So I'm going to give a brief summary overview of adult education and the requirements that we had to address in the state plan. So this is a breakdown of each individual topic that's covered. So one of the questions requires us to address content standards that have been adopted by the state. Second are the required activities under the law that have to be provided. How are we planning to go about addressing those needs? How are we going to bid or address corrections education under the law? Integrated English literacy and civics education. How are we going to use state leadership funds, assessing the equality, and then also how are applicants addressing the General Education Provisions Act? So first up, content standards. So to address this, Tennessee has adopted the College and Career Readiness Standards. So the standards are based to improve the in-functioning level of students so that students are better equipped for employment and post-secondary completion. And the implementation of the standards will be conducted through professional development and training of instructors. So through adult education, we'll send consultants out to train our teachers and to ensure that the instruction that they're providing is in line with those content standards. Next are the local activities. So the way I broke down the local activities within the plan is in a pipeline development. So first up, I address preparation activities. So that addresses those individuals who are coming in that are within that basic skills deficiency range, so grade level 1 through 8. And so the idea is to prepare those individuals in as they progress through the adult education services that they would then end up into the exam preparation and training portion of adult education. So within the preparation activities, we have adult education, which focuses on those basic skills. We also have the English language acquisition and then integrated English literacy and civics education. In the next portion of that pipeline, we have our levels 5 and 6. So those are individuals who are coming in for exam preparation, usually higher functioning, and then we'll have the opportunity to then transition on into training opportunities with career pathways, co-enrollments, and when I mean co-enrollments, I mean with post-secondary institutions to earn credits and certificates, things like that, and then also collaboration with employers. Next up, what was addressed within the adult ed portion is corrections education. So we require that our local providers work and collaborate with local corrections institutions to provide services to those that are incarcerated. So under the law, the requirement is that we are not to exceed 20% of the available funding towards being provided towards corrections education. And the services will include all those that are underneath the traditional activities of adult education. So the provision of adult basic education and exam preparation, collaboration with reentry efforts, and partnerships to assist in training opportunities. Next up, we have to address specifically the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education Program. So these funds are separate and apart from the adult basic education funds. So that we would have to compete those funds specifically for integrated English literacy and civics, so that they'll have to address certain questions for those services and for that funding, and then the funds will be expended for English language acquisition activities, and it has to be blended with civics education. Also, with integrated English literacy and civics education, the providers have to provide the integrated education and training opportunity. It's not that every student has to be enrolled in that, but there has to be the option if they wanted to take part in that opportunity. And then also collaboration within the workforce system through direct linkage or referrals with the American Job Center system. Next up are state leadership funds. So these are funds that the state uses in order to address required activities. So the plan is to use these funds for the development of career pathways and training, providing professional development opportunities for instruction and support services, identifying professional third-party training opportunities for local providers, and providing technical assistance to improve instruction and collaboration among workforce partners. How we're going to go about assessing the quality of services and how providers are carrying out the services is that we will go out and conduct monitoring visits as well as desktop review to ensure that they are providing the services that are required and in line with the law, and that also that they're meeting performance. And then also we'll go out and provide technical assistance and training to those programs that we find need that based on those reviews. And then lastly, within the law, applicants, whenever they're applying for funds within the competition, have to address the General Education Provisions Act. So providers are required to address how services will be adapted to serve populations with special needs during the application process. So that could range from those with disabilities or those who are underrepresented and might not receive the same type of services as traditional students would. So that's a high-level overview of the adult ed specific portion of the state plan.
Any questions for Ian? Yes.
All right, I clearly understand what integrated English literacy, what's the civic program entails, what's that part?
A program, can you hear me? Did it come back on? So programs are required within the integrated English literacy and civics education that within that education, it has to embed certain civics requirements so that it helps incorporate and those seeking those services, those immigrants seeking those services can operate within the community, such as taking citizenship exams, voting, things like that. So it can't just be the English language activity, it has to have that civics component.
On the corrections education, not to exceed 20% of available funding, what's the other 80% doing?
So the rest of the funding is going to the regular adult ed activities in English language that happen outside of corrections facilities.
The adoption of the college and career readiness standards, are those the standards that are already set for high school graduates? You're just using the same standards for adult ed?
I believe so. I'll have to get back to you on that.
And if I can have a copy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're very exciting to read.
Oh, well, I'm sure.
Yes.
If I may, I don't have a question, but I guess the word is excited about this. Maybe it's frustrated, maybe it's something, because in the state of Tennessee, we have more people without a high school diploma than we actually have enrolled in high school. And that's not just a practical problem, it's a moral problem. And so we got some things to figure out, how to stop that flow coming in and how to address this. And I think, just for this board's knowledge too, I think one of the innovations that Ian's folks have worked on is, okay, so we have this gigantic high school. Well, and I always would refer to it as an orphaned educational system here. And so how do we have a secondary system, so how do we learn from our friends in DOE to do some of the same things? And so that progress is being made. So like in Knoxville, they're dual enrolled, taking CNA programs, and that's a really good path because you can progress, and a lot of off ramps, a lot of in ramps. And in Columbia, Tennessee, it's integrated into a pre-apprenticeship program. So the folks who are coming, because the issue is certainly the 450,000 working age people without a high school diploma, but a high school diploma is not enough. And so how do we give these folks a path to prosperity while we have them? And so that's where a lot of the effort is with that group of folks. And as you can imagine, the correlations between the, high school education and incarceration and all kinds of bad things. And so it's something that, we talk about it, but it's something that is central to on Denise's side of the house is what I think about, that we're integrating and trying to push that forward. But what I want the board to understand is I want you to understand the problem. And so there's a lot of great minds around here, and so whatever feedback you have, whatever thoughts you have on progressing, whatever you need to push us on to hold us accountable for the efforts that we need to make, that's really what we need from you on this particular subject in particular. So I just wanted to say that as well.
Good. Any comments on commissioners?
Commissioner, we need
Yeah.
more sites for adult ed in rural Tennessee. I'm sure there's an urban challenge too, but I've got transportation challenges I can't beat. A combination of sites and transportation are the solutions for us right now.
And Commissioner Christine Hopkins, these sites need to be visible, and they need to be marketed. And I don't know how much money the department has to advertise. But I know in reentry, we receive calls from the outside. Do we have high-set, GED, whatever, offered in Franklin County? I don't know whether they don't bother to know that they're out there or whatever, but if you put them across the railroad tracks, you can't see the building, you can't see the sign, and it's not advertised, the people are not going to go. And I know this for a fact because I've been doing a lot of surveys with our incarcerated people, that at least 50% of incarcerated individuals do not have a high school diploma. And it really concerns me and bothers me that the 20% is out there, that only 20%, because that means only a minor part of those individuals can be served.
Yeah, so that, yes, ma'am, and thank you for that. That 20% is a federal restriction on funding. The state penitentiaries have the ability to do high school equivalency training as well. And I know what your next thing is, but what about the local what about their locals?
That's right.
Yes, ma'am, I knew it was coming, so.
Rural counties,
so,
rural counties,
yeah,
we cannot get away from
The good
it.
thing is, we know what the problem is. We're not searching around for a problem with that particular problem. So yes, we need to focus on what we need to do with those. Right now, for whatever reason, the 20% cap is restrictions on our funding from the federal government. That's where that comes from. So how do we, I mean, that's the problem, but so how do we figure out a solution around that, especially working with our sheriffs and that sort of thing to make that happen?
And Ian, of that 20% we're allowed to spend, what percentage of that are we spending?
I'll have to double check what was reported last year. I know that with, so that cap goes out to local providers. And so there is a possibility that if one provider isn't spending that full 20%, then we can allow another provider to spend more.
Over, yeah.
So we are looking at that, but I'll have to look at that data for last year, what we were reporting and what we are so far reporting this year.
Yeah, Deputy.
As a state department or from the governor's office, if we let the feds know that this is an issue, I mean, our congressmen that represent and senators that represent Tennessee probably doesn't even know that that is out there. And I would think that that would be the first step to find out, do they even know that it's out there? And is it possible to change it? It's just a suggestion.
Deputy?
We appreciate your comments, Ms. Christina. You're exactly right. And going back to the event that Kenyatta highlighted for next month, that's exactly why it's so important to have federal visitation to our state, and why it's so important to have our federal partners in the room with our governor. Because oftentimes when the governor can state his case for vision in that state, it's very hard federally to have that rejected. There's ways to work around it. So that's why we want to bring these partners together to talk about the limitations that we're facing in Tennessee and how we can provide some workarounds. And I want to address specifically the outreach piece because I'm right there with you. People can't take advantage of what they don't know. And so right now there is a current RFP on the streets for adult education for providers. And if I could submit my plea to the board members, we need your support. in your respective communities, if you know individuals, organizations who can provide these services and have the heart and the capacity to do so, we need them competing, because we need folks who take this program very seriously. Not to say our current providers don't. We have some really good providers, but we owe it to those providers, both current and those who are forthcoming, to provide them with a vision that's going to get to the whole of some core issues we have here in our workforce development system. And part of that is to find ways to leverage what we can do. I'm not a focus on what we can't. I don't do well with limitations. I'm not a rule breaker, but I believe that there are certain... But I do believe that if we can focus on where we have the opportunity, that there are some things that we can move forward. And those limitations, unfortunately, will always exist, but they can be minimized if we better leverage and make our opportunities more transparent and, quite frankly, more practical across agencies. Because what you'll find is that we may have a limitation in labor, but our other partners don't. And so the key is to working together cooperatively to overcome those challenges. And so I can certainly commit to you, because my boss is sitting next to me, and so he's made the commitment for me, that you will see a more intentional direction and vision of how we not just onboard and resource our providers, but how well we move with some level of urgency in adult education. Not that it's not always been important to us, but I think we need your megaphone as board members to really stress across the state that this is not an invisible program. This is a core part, and it's at the center of workforce development. We have labor force participation issues in our state. And as Commissioner has touted, we have 500,000 folks who we need to get in the game, and get in the game with the right equipment and the right playbook. And so that's our charge moving forward, but we need your help.
Well, when county mayors and county sheriffs tell me that they do not have access to adult basic education, I cringe. We're spending right now, and I'm on the school board, and we're spending $48 million for 2 brand-new middle schools. But our adult basic education is being held in an old abandoned schoolhouse. It's something wrong with that scenario. Our governor is leading us in a very positive direction for this state to serve all of our people of this state. And I am so proud to be a part of his team as well as this state board. And I think we're hearing today some things that, and she hasn't even spoken yet, but I heard some things in Oversight Committee this morning that is so refreshing. And I think we just got to keep pushing from all of the departments to get in these rural areas where we do not have the resources to make these things happen, but we can make the resources. I mean, it's like my friend E.L. Morton says, we need to grow it. Mm-hmm. Plant the garden and let it grow.
Good comments. Thank you for that discussion. It was good. Let's move on to hear from the Department of Human Services, and Mandy Johnson, what do you have for us today?
Thank you so much. So I'm excited to share with you all the vocational rehabilitations portion of the combined state plan, and just share with you some highlights from that plan. So first off, taking a lead from the commissioner, we came up with a cool graphic. So this graphic really, I just wanted to set some context and with regard to all of the important pieces that lay the foundation for the VR portion of the plan. It's not done in isolation, it's not done in a silo, and it really is building on the great work and priorities that have been set by our governor. It aligns and integrates with the priorities identified by this board. It also aligns with the priorities for our department, the Department of Human Services. And then some of you may not know, but within vocational rehabilitation, we also have a governing body, our State Rehabilitation Council. So that's a governor-appointed council that advises the state's vocational rehabilitation program. And so the State Rehabilitation Council is charged with conducting a comprehensive statewide needs assessment every 3 years. And so that needs assessment was just conducted over the last year. And the information obtained in that needs assessment was used to inform and build the priorities that you will see in this plan. So that's our fun graphic for the plan. Also, I just wanted to provide some disability data and set some additional context around why the work that we do within vocational rehabilitation is important. And I think, we've already talked about record low unemployment and a tight labor market. I think this disability data just helps show that we have actually an often untapped and overlooked resource in our population of individuals with disabilities who want to go to work and who provide unique skill sets and resources and tools to the workforce to help meet their needs. And so this is just some general data. One of the stats that's not on this chart, but I think is one of the ones that we focus on quite a bit as a state, is really looking at the gap between individuals with a disability and those without a disability, that gap in employment. And even in this wonderful market where we are today, that gap still remains at about 40%. And so individuals with a disability are 40% less likely than their peers without a disability to be working. And so what we want to do is make sure that the services and supports that we're providing are supports that are helping to close that gap. So the priorities that we identified for ourselves within the vocational rehabilitation program really align nicely, again, with the priorities of this board, the governor, and the priorities that Commissioner McCord laid out as well for our state workforce development system. And the 5 priorities that we have within VR are focusing on communication. That's communication both internally within our organization, but also externally with our peers in the state workforce system and with our stakeholders and the individuals that we serve, making sure that we are providing good communication, consistent communication, and really getting information out there. I think also to Ms. Hopkins' point, if people don't know about us and don't know about the resources that we have, they're not going to access them. So we've got to get that information out there. A second priority for us within vocational rehabilitation is focusing on our leadership and our talent management. We can't do the work that we need to do without a professional, well-organized, and well-developed staff. And so some of the things that we're working on within vocational rehabilitation is our staffing structure, the way that we're organized across the state, but also how we're training our staff and the resources that we're investing in them so that they are better prepared to provide high-quality services. A third priority for us is the modernization of our systems and processes. We want to work smarter, and we want to work in a way that creates efficiencies and effectiveness across the state, but focusing back on the individual that we serve, that customer experience. People aren't going to partake in our resources, aren't going to participate in our programs if they're cumbersome, if they're disjointed, and if they just don't make sense. And so we're looking at everything that we do from the moment we interact with an individual, when they're referred to us for services, to when they leave our services, and what can we do to improve that interaction and also remove any of those barriers. The fourth priority for us is around that service delivery. This year marks the 100th anniversary of the vocational rehabilitation program nationally, and it provides a wonderful opportunity for us to take stock in where we are and what we've been able to achieve under the Rehabilitation Act, but it also presents an opportunity for us to look to the future. The way that the world looked, the way that Tennessee looked 100 years ago, is very different than the way it looks today. And so we need to modernize our services. We need to align those with the jobs that are available here in Tennessee and ensure that the programs and services that we are providing both to individuals and to the business community meet their current workforce needs. And then lastly, our fifth priority is around using the data and information that we have. We collect a lot of information. We have a lot of data, and we need to use it to help us make better decisions. We need to use this information to make sure that the services that we're providing are resulting in the outcomes that we want to achieve. And so by using our data, looking at not only what we have, but what our partners have, and using that to inform how we deliver services is a priority for us. So those were kind of the high-level goals or priorities in our four-year plan, but some specific goals that we have for ourselves coming up this year are to really drill into and begin addressing those priorities. And so in this slide, you'll see on the left some specific goals that we have for ourselves and how those tie into the strategic priorities that we've laid out for ourselves in the right-hand column. So one thing that we're working on within the vocational rehabilitation program is that we are actually implementing a new case management system. So again, tying into that modernizing systems and processes. So we are implementing this new case management system, which is going to lead into that second goal, which is a review and revision of our policies and procedures. We are looking at everything from beginning to end to really look at how we can modernize our systems, modernize our processes, and really revolutionize the service delivery model within the VR program. Third, we are implementing training statewide for our staff that is focused on person-centered planning. And so really, again, getting back to the individuals that we're supporting, making sure that we are providing services that help meet their needs, not our needs, not the system's needs. And so we are embarking on a year-long training endeavor with, we're actually partnering with the Council on Developmental Disabilities. They are helping us in identifying a national subject matter expert to bring in and deliver this training statewide to all of our vocational rehabilitation staff, and that will be happening over the next year. We are also on the path to transform our 17 community rehabilitation centers. So we have 17 centers that are located across the state. These centers were created back in the 60s, I believe. And by and large, they are delivering the services that they started delivering back then. And so we realized that it is time to update and modernize that service delivery. These centers are primarily in several of our rural areas, and so they present a wonderful opportunity for us to look at new and innovative ways to deliver services in those communities and reach those populations. Another key priority in this transformation is to look at how we can more innovatively partner with our state counterparts. How can we braid funding and maximize our resources? So if VR can pay for one thing and adult ed can pay for another, how can we do those things together in a way that makes sense? Next, we are assessing and evaluating our approach to professional development. So the person-centered training is one component of that I mentioned earlier, but we're also updating the way that we onboard and train our staff that come on to the VR program. We're also assessing our staffing, the positions within the VR program, the position classifications, looking at the core competencies for those positions and making sure that the position descriptions and the compensation for those positions align with the expectations that we have for our staff in delivering high-quality services. And then lastly, we're looking at ways to improve and expand opportunities for customer engagement. If we're really wanting to impact and revolutionize that service delivery and focus on the customer's experience, we have to listen to them. And so we're looking at ways that we can do that. So some of the things that are included in the plan also include our performance goals. And this is an area where vocational rehabilitation, as a partner within the state workforce plan, we are a few years behind the other components in terms of setting our performance targets. So you will see that for the core outcome measures that we have across all the workforce partners, we are still setting baseline metrics in several of these for the VR program. So for the year 2020 and 2021, we are still collecting baseline data that will inform future targets. However, for the measurable skill gains, we are at a point to set a target for that, and we have set our target at 20% of our participants. So 20% of individuals that are enrolled in a post-secondary credential-bearing opportunity, we want at least 20% of those individuals obtaining that measurable skill gain in those programs. And then we're increasing that to 25% in year 21. Finally, some additional data also included in the plan just gives a snapshot into some numbers around individuals that we serve. So we have to provide estimates for the upcoming year in terms of how many new applicants we anticipate and how many individuals we anticipate serving. And so our estimate for 2020 is to take in approximately 6,000 new applications, just over 6,000 new applications, which will assist us in providing services to just under 14,000 individuals in the state. And we also have a smaller program that's within the vocational rehabilitation program specific to supported employment that's serving the individuals with the most significant disabilities. And so we've set some additional targets for that program as well. I think that covers the VR portion. Any questions?
Okay, questions for Mandy?
I have a question.
You mentioned 17 centers. How do I find where those are located?
I can tell you. I didn't start in 1960 with them, but I started in 1975, and I was their state director. But they're all the way from Union City to Elizabethton, Tennessee. And those centers really, I retired in 2000, but they were actually performed, and Jay Leno there serves on that state board. And I served until I left them to come to this board. But they're wonderful centers, and they have some really good people. And it's really refreshing to hear what she was saying and what they're looking at. And I took the commissioner's chart because in Winchester, we're already looking at the one in Winchester to how we're going, hopefully, with her blessing and Commissioner Barnes' blessing, to make it happen to where a little of all of everything is taking place. The adult basic education is a perfect location. It's in the industrial park. The training, all of the career training, cognitive behavior treatment, on and on and on. But I took your chart and I made a list while you were talking. No, I looked at what you're doing because we wanted, when we present it to her, we want it to really look like. But I met with the director of their program this week, and we went over what could be with everybody's blessing. But your closest one, Marcia, is in Winchester. And then you have one in, you did have one in Jasper that was created different, but it eventually closed.
Mandy, is there a place that they can
There's
go
one in
to
Bradley
see the
County.
list?
Yes.
In Cleveland, Tennessee.
So the full list is on our department website. So if you go to the Department of Human Services and click on, I believe it's under Disability Services, there is a listing of vocational rehabilitation offices, and those 17 centers are specifically listed as well.
Thank you.
But even more refreshing is the 32,000 individuals that are in our local jails, with approximately 16,000 of them, 50 to 60% with mental illness and substance abuse. I'm looking forward to really working with the Department of Human Services Division of Rehab Services and mental health to get inside and hopefully provide the treatment that will return productive citizens to our communities. drugs are taking over unless we stop it right where it is. And Mandy, thank you so much. I really appreciate, the happiest years of my life was in vocational rehab. And I appreciate the things that you all are planning. Looking forward to working with you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Yes, E.L.
On the disability data, how much of that is represented by opioid dependency? Any idea?
I don't know that off the top of my head, and I can pull that full survey. I know they collect it in very broad categories, but they can break it out into some categories. I just don't know if it's full, if it will be, include the opioid.
And to Christine's point about our program, are you servicing folks in local jails through your center or through recovery courts?
So we are partnering with the Department of Corrections in a couple of different ways. One, we currently work with them through an MOU at their day reporting centers. So working with individuals who are on parole, probation and parole, and through the day reporting centers, supporting those individuals who also have a disability in preparing for and going back to work. We're also working locally with some of our smaller jails and others to, as individuals are preparing for release, if they may be eligible for our programs, we're going in and starting that eligibility process before they exit so that they can exit with services and supports to help them go back to work.
And the distribution is great, but we do have a geographic hole in it from Mid-Cumberland area across northern East Tennessee along that Kentucky border. If there's ever an opportunity, it would be a great place to go.
Yes, Bill?
Mandy, just a quick question, just I'm asking out of ignorance here. Is there any coordination or cooperation between you and the Department of Veterans Affairs? And are your numbers primarily just the civilian population, or do they include veterans that are, in need of vocational education as well?
We do work well with them. The Department of Veteran Affairs also has a federal vocational rehabilitation program, and so they can participate in both. And so we do try to coordinate those. Oftentimes, they start with their federal VR benefits and then may transition to state benefits.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from Andy? All right, very good, thank you. Great report. And now we're going to get an update on career and technical education. Steve?
Hi, good morning. My name is Steve Plale. I'm the Senior Director of College and Career Experiences for the Tennessee Department of Education. Thank you, Chairman, members of the board, and guests for allowing me to be here and talk a little bit about the intersection of this work and what is happening here at the Department of Labor with the WIOA state plan and all of the other pieces of that work for workforce development, how that intersects with education, and specifically career and technical education. So be brief. In your packets, those of you who have packets on your right-hand side, you should have, kind of right behind the vocational rehab presentation, you should have a one-page document that looks something like this. From the Department of Education. That gives just an overview, and I'm just going to hit kind of the highlights. You are maybe aware, hopefully you are aware, in July of 2018, President Trump signed into law the Strengthening Career and Technical Education for the 21st Century Act, otherwise known as Perkins 5, because this is the fifth iteration of the Carl D. Perkins Act. The last time that this was revised was in 2006, so it needed a pretty substantial update and revision. As a result of that, over the last 18 months, the Department of Education, along with our partners here at the Department of Labor and Economic and Community Development, Human Services, so on, we have developed a 4-year state plan for career and technical education. This, even though I'm at the Department of Education and I primarily represent K-12 education, Perkins extends beyond K-12 into post-secondary. So this touches all of the work that we're doing for career and technical education at the Department of Corrections, work with adult learners through Voc Rehab, also adult education here at the Department of Labor, and then also Tennessee Board of Regents and THEC as well. So a very large breadth of what this work and this legislation covers and touches. But we are ready. We are getting ready to submit. Actually, we will submit at the same time that the WIOA state plan is submitted to the governor. We will submit the Strengthening Career and Technical Education in Tennessee 4-year state plan. And with that, we have identified a new vision and a new kind of definition of success for what career and technical education should be in Tennessee. And you can see that here at the top of your page. It's to expand opportunities for all students to explore, choose, and follow a career pathway to success. As a part of this process, you are probably familiar with the Department of Education's new strategic plan, Best for All, THEC's new master plan, obviously the Department of Labor's WIOA plan, Tennessee Board of Regents strategic plan updates. There's a lot of plans that are out there. And we did not want this to be just another plan. We wanted this to really kind of connect the dots across all of these different workforce systems and strategic plans and education systems to support our students who are in our career and technical education programs. So with that in mind, we have identified a theory of action or a definition of success, and that's also at the top of this one-pager. Implementing this plan will result in a substantial increase in the number of students who are accessing aligned career pathways, participating in high-quality learning experiences, and on track to meet post-secondary goals 2 years after high school or post-secondary graduation, as measured through 2- and 4-year college persistence, technical certificate attainment, military enlistment, workforce participation, and similar paths. How we're going to achieve that is by focusing on 3 big priority areas. The first of which is ensuring or expanding equitable access to comprehensive career and technical education, specifically in early and middle grades. That would be your 5th grade through 8th grade. We want to expand the opportunities for students to engage in career exploration and awareness, advisement services. One of the things that we're wanting to provide as a department for the state and for our school districts across the state are aptitude and interest surveys or interest assessments, and then also expanding what programs we actually offer at the middle school and how we can expand that access to students at the middle school level. This, though, even though we're focusing primarily on middle school in that priority, it also extends to secondary, high school, and then post-secondary, and a lot of work that is happening around expanding the number of programs and the opportunities for students to engage in career and technical education. The second priority that we are focusing in on here is aligned career pathways and expanding participation in aligned career pathways so that students can seamlessly transition into high-skill, high-wage, and in-demand employment, whether they go directly into employment right out of high school, they go on to advanced training at a TCAT or a community college or a 4-year institution, military. There is some transition plan or a pathway for students to be able to transition once they finish that training or that education into employment. Some big things here that we're really excited about, some collaboration with the Department of Labor on in this is around the data and ensuring that what we are offering at our K-12 schools and at our post-secondary institutions actually matches up with employment opportunities that are regionally based. So if there is a misalignment there, what can we do to ensure stronger alignment, repurpose programs, or start new programs to meet the workforce demands and workforce need, build this pipeline out. The third priority of this strengthening CTE in Tennessee plan is really our moonshot. I'm going to steal that term from Commissioner Penny Schwinn, our commissioner at the Department of Education. But our moonshot here with this plan is to double the number of students who are participating in work-based learning and earning the relevant credentials, certificates, or degrees that are needed to meet our workforce demand here in Tennessee. We know, based on the data that we've been able to gather and national best practices, work-based learning is extremely impactful for students. When they actually get to see what it's like in a workplace, experience the world of work, they're more or better prepared, I guess, to make career decisions. I didn't know, or I thought I wanted to go into healthcare when I was in high school. I did a work-based learning experience, or co-op at that time. Found out very quickly I don't like the sight of blood. So my whole career path changed at that moment because I had the opportunity to experience that in a workplace setting. So we're really excited about that and excited about the opportunity to partner with the Department of Labor to build out some new resources and new materials, new data to support that work there on work-based learning. On the back of this page is what we are calling an articulated pathways model, or the Tennessee model for career pathways. This should kind of show you or be a visual of what we're talking about in developing a pathway. Starting in early grades with foundational academic skills, Commissioner Schwinn and the department are really pushing, the governor even, really pushing in on early foundational academic skills, reading, writing, mathematics, but then transitioning that into career awareness, career exploration in middle grades, laying a really strong foundation in our CTE programs at the high school level, and then really preparing students at the community college or the TCAT level to take that next step in employment. So very quickly, very brief, but I just wanted to give a high-level overview of what the work is that we're prioritizing over the next 4 years in career and technical education at the secondary level and the post-secondary level. I can go as deep as you want to go in here in the next few minutes, Chairman, but I'll open it for questions.
All right, questions for Steve?
Not a question, but a comment. You mentioned on making sure that we are providing programs of study that are relevant to the region. I think that's very, very critical. You know, a lot of times, I remember when I first came to Tennessee, you know, this is over a decade ago, looking at CTE, and it was things that weren't relevant to what was out there in industry. So a very good, you know, job in making sure that we're providing those things. And I think the important thing to remember, though, is especially in manufacturing and industry, technology is changing so quickly that we need to make sure that we're staying, you know, up to date and keeping that relationship with industry open so that they are able to share with us, or able to share with the department the future of what technology is out there, so that we're providing those experiences for those students as well. So I think it's important that we don't just sit back and say, okay, we're done now, but provide a system in place to make sure that we're keeping relevant with what the technology, how the technology is changing.
I could not agree more. You know, I think there's a very common misconception or myth when you poll the general public here in Tennessee that there are deserts of economic opportunity in Tennessee. That's not the case. There are a lot of employment options, no matter where you are in Tennessee, even in very rural communities. There are options and high-paying, high-skill, high-wage occupations. We just need to make sure that all throughout the pathway we're setting kids up and young adults, and actually this can impact adults who are transitioning, reconnect, and all of those different options for our folks here in Tennessee. We need to make sure that we're setting them up for the occupations and the opportunities that are there close to them. We don't want, I'm from Bristol originally. I would hate if I was still in Bristol working with students or young folks, I'd hate for them to feel like they have to go to Knoxville for an employment opportunity. They have to come to Nashville for an employment opportunity. There are a lot there in the Tri-Cities and in Northeast Tennessee.
That's my question for you, Steve. Are there enough programs out there for students who are interested in doing that?
Yeah, another great question. And I think we can definitely make that stronger. I think there are opportunities to add programs. There's a lot that's happening right now with technology. Digital agronomy on the agriculture side, we do not have any programs at the high school level for that. We have very limited options at the post-secondary level for that, but it's something that we're hearing as a need from industry, especially in West Tennessee, Shelby County, Memphis area. So there are definitely options to continue and improve that alignment, but we're being very intentional about what we're doing there. Actually, a part that is not reflected on this page or had not talked about, we are asking all of our local recipients, or K-12 institutions or school districts, post-secondary institutions who receive Perkins funding, they are required now to do what's called a comprehensive local needs assessment. And that requires them to deep dive into their local and regional employment data, labor market data, look at where their students are going, what they're doing, and having a really strong partnership with an advisory council to inform and validate and evaluate their programs and what they're offering. So those are all kind of new components to this that were not in the previous legislation. That we're really excited about.
The graphic on the back page in the yellow portion, top block says industry certification, apprenticeship, and military training. We've got a real shortage across the state of EMTs and paramedics.
Yeah.
Are we making any progress with transitioning combat medics out of the military into our workforce?
I don't know that I can speak to that directly, but I know someone who can, and that is Assistant Commissioner Kenyatta Lovett. We actually had this exact conversation yesterday.
Yes, and that conversation is part of the governor and the commissioner's collaborative group that's moving forward with the workforce system. We have a veteran transition task force, and that came up, and so our goal is to tackle first healthcare and logistics to see if we can go ahead and speed up articulation between what our veterans have accomplished and achieved and proven and demonstrated, and making sure that those credentials aren't a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 year pathway, but a pretty easy transition to get that credential and into a job. So we'll keep you posted on the milestones for that.
What was up until a year or so ago was it's not recognized. You got to go all the way through the system.
And I think there's a lot of opportunity to use this as an example or a model. What's going to be done here with EMT and combat medics. That transition I think could be done or used as a model for other programs and ensure alignment. We have industry certifications we offer to high school students that may or may not articulate to post-secondary credit. We've got programs or certifications that can be offered at our correctional facilities that may or may not articulate to post-secondary credit. So we've got some work to do there.
But that's not a good answer, and so we need to have a different answer.
Get a lot of experience we put right in the workforce.
Yeah, Michelle?
I just want to bring everything together. You spoke before about kids leaving school, and I was just wondering, this is great for people that want to stay in school, that want to grow, that actually want it. How do we incentivize those that are in the brink of leaving or?
Yeah, another great question and something that we've definitely been discussing and how we can ensure alignment between Perkins and WIOA with in-school, out-of-school youth. We know that if a student becomes a concentrator in career and technical education, they take multiple courses in CTE, their graduation rate is about 98% statewide versus 89, 90 in the total student population. So we know that they're staying there when we get them. So we've got to start this pathway earlier so that we can make sure that we engage them sooner. They don't become disengaged as a high school student. When you look at post-secondary and retention rates, I think there's opportunity there to ensure that we're retaining students at the post-secondary level. They're not leaving. They're not getting pulled in from other things. Life happens. So how do we make sure that we keep them on a pathway or have opportunities for them to rejoin the pathway later on? A lot of work has been done with the WIOA plan on in-school, out-of-school youth, and I would encourage local boards, for those of you who are representing local boards here, to definitely have conversations with your CTE directors and those who are responsible for CTE at the post-secondary institutions in your regions, your K-12 schools in your regions, to make sure that alignment between in-school, out-of-school youth and Perkins is even more clear and stronger.
But I will say to your point, and actually, I know it's DOE and we're partnering to help remove some bottlenecks, but so a CTE concentrator and work-based learning, you look at a place like Gestamp and Chattanooga or Black & Decker and Jackson, where you have 16, 17-year-olds working, making a wage, and you hear stories about they become the primary wage earner. And so what happens there is they start at 16, and then they get involved in the company's apprenticeship program, and then their wages increase. And really, when a kid gets involved in work, a lot of good things happen, a lot of bad things don't. And so that's really doubling the work-based learning is educational, but it's also social. And so we're really excited about the work going with in partnership with education and labor. And I know you have other partners on that project as well. And so really pushing that. But that's a very, very good point.
Yeah, I'll comment. I've seen some CTE programs up close, and what I've experienced is that the students who are engaged in that, maybe they thought college was a little bit out of reach for them, but this kind of gives them a little breath of fresh air and say, hey, wait a minute, this is something I can do. And so it does give them that incentive. Instead of just saying, it's not for me, why do I even stick around high school? They go, oh, this is a path that I can get my head around. And by participating, that gives them that incentive and pocket money to keep going.
I think the other thing that these programs teach young people is what it's like to be in the workplace. And they're learning that things like dependability and things like punctuality, things of ability to communicate, those are all important characteristics that they need to strengthen and develop, and I think it's going to help them be successful in their future. And I want to commend you on, to me, these aligned career pathways, these two middle ones, educator recruitment, retention, and training, work ethic, leadership, employability, skill development, those are critical. As an industry representative, those are critical for that incoming workforce to have those capabilities, that work ethic, leadership, employability skills. This is where they can learn it. One of the things I want to keep emphasizing is that let's make sure that in the classroom when they're teaching this, and is that we are setting those expectations of work ethic and so forth, that they're teaching that this is something that we're not just doing it because you're in school, but these are expectations that you're going to have with your employer, and help them to understand the valuable component of that. And the other thing too, and I've mentioned this before, is we've got to make sure that we are, in these programs, that we have some of the best educators. Teachers make a huge difference in getting kids excited about this type of stuff. And if you have an educator that's sitting back behind their computer and surfing Facebook versus engaging with them and teaching them, that can make a huge difference. So we really have to continue to making sure that we're identifying and recruiting those right recruiters, and then teaching them and training them to be more effective. So,
absolutely. Just to respond to that, on this one pager, the big buckets there are in the orange, blue, and green. Those other sub-bullets are specific strategies that we're wanting to implement. So specific strategies around educator recruitment, retention, and training. We know there's a shortage of teachers in general, but especially in hard-to-fill areas, and CTE is one of those. So when you can go into private industry and make a whole lot more money and not have to deal with students and all of those other things, we've got to figure out other ways that we can not only attract to recruit teachers to the field, but also once we have them, retain and make sure that they're properly trained so that they can best serve those students. On the work ethic piece, just real briefly, really excited about that one, and I think that we can make a really strong impact on our students and our state moving forward for years to come. Taken straight from districts who are already doing this. In Northeast Tennessee, all 8 counties in Northeast Tennessee are doing this work ethic diploma initiative. In Lawrence County, they have now taken that and adopted it, modified it a little bit, and pushed it all the way down to the 5th grade. So, there's some exciting things that are happening on leadership development, work ethics, employability skills, and making sure that we start that at an earlier age.
I just, high level here real quick, and a reminder of why this board is so important and your value on this board, because we need, the next time Steve shows up, say, how's that doubling the CTE work-based learning happening, Steve? We all have really nice graphics, but the progress is going to be made when we have to stand up and answer those questions. And so really, again, it's okay to, except for Miss Christine, to have really, really hard questions and ask those questions for us so that we stay with this. As boring as that sounds, we need to stay with this. So, thank you.
In our county, we're opening a brand new TCAT in just a few weeks, and the CTE programs in the high school have been aligned to make sure that they're going to that next step up when they go to the post-secondary TCAT program.
That's the perfect example of what this career pathway should be. So, it's encouraging to hear that that's happening, and I'm excited for the day that it's happening across the state.
A lot of passion and interest around this topic. Thank you, Steve. Good work.
Thank you.
Yes.
Chairman Berry, if I can, we've heard from a lot of the key components of the WIOA state plan, but I do want to call the board's attention back to the presentation that Dr. Lovett provided earlier in the meeting regarding the WIOA work groups that will be established. It's important to note that the expanse of the work that this board touches, you touch a lot. And so this whole new format and how we break the work down is going to be very key. And so as commissioner and the other commissioners really lead this workforce advisory team, and then you have the WIOA pieces, it's a lot to sometimes bring into context. So the key for these work groups is going to be to take the work from a state vision and then underneath sort of that federal requirement of WIOA and bring the two of those together, so that when we're briefing the committees, we're telling you about the work and already bringing in models of best practice. So Mayor Morton brought up the licensure from military to an EMT. We know that already exists nationally. Florida's been doing it for years, and it's worked great. So our charge will be to bring those models to the board so that in an effort to not duplicate efforts among agencies, we're not asking the state board to duplicate efforts by working on something that's already been done either nationally or within another agency. So again, the key is going to be for our board members to really put a demand on us as we assemble these groups so that we're bringing you information that's relevant and not just bringing you more information. So to Commissioner's point, the goal will be for the committees is to present based on outcome data, how well we've accomplished some things. This is a fairly aggressive plan. We've been given an aggressive workforce charge. So we want to measure output so that we can tweak. Because again, a plan is a plan, but it doesn't do anything except tell you what we hope to do. It doesn't say that we've done anything. So the key for those work groups, again, is when we establish those, is to bring this type of information in front of the board to get your feedback so then we're off into our respective agencies. We're working on efforts that will align all of the state functionality together because, again, this board touches a variety of things under WIOA. And so I just want to reemphasize, Chairman Berry, that that's really going to be the whole purpose of these groups is to stabilize the work and deduplicate even at the governance level.
Excellent. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you. Goes back to that efficiency goal. All right. Well, we're a little behind, but let's make this break short. So if you would try to be back in your seats at about Noon, yeah.
And for the board members, if you can just stay with us for just a few moments, Ann and Riley, we'd love to get a picture with you, Riley, from the board.
Yeah, that'd be great. Okay, so the board members, let's have our picture made with Riley before. Okay, thank you. Next up, we're going to hear from James Roberson, Assistant Administrator for Tennessee Department of Labor and Workforce Development. James, what do you have for us today?
All right. Great. Okay, that'll work too. Dance with the microphones today. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking about 2 weeks of information that we obtained from the local workforce development areas through 6 different categories from 9 different areas and condensing this into a 10-minute presentation. So now I have 9.5 minutes left to go. But no, actually, this was at the request at the last board meeting, was to look at some of the concerns that we had in regards to the career service providers meeting state workforce board performance metrics. And so what we did is we sent out a questionnaire to the local workforce boards and wanted to determine the following: procedures that the local boards have established with a WIA governing structure that we have set up to ensure providers meet their performance metrics, and then to also look at best practices and areas of need improvement with the one-stop operators and career service provider performance and capacity. So with that, we ended up with 6 different categories that were answered by the local boards and then reviewed by state staff and then condensed into this the next 5 slides you'll see what we have in regards to our findings, if you will. So the categories were for subcontractors' ability to meet contractual obligations, determining risk found through subcontractor monitoring, and for subcontractors, their capacity to serve and carry out their role, their defined roles and responsibilities to ensure adherence to the federal and state requirements, all of the policies that the state board has redacted here, and then the ability to serve all counties with a local workforce development area. Because, you know, oftentimes the question is, can we serve, do we have the capacity to serve across all counties across the state? As I give you the next 5 slides, you have a handout here that shows some of the state considerations to the far right of each slide. They're in the blue box. And what we do is at the end of this presentation is just sort of group up those considerations, because our intent was, okay, so if we give you this information as a state board, what do you do with it? What's the next step? So what we're asking you to do is at the end of this presentation, be thinking throughout the presentation, where may there be opportunities for adopting statewide practices to ensure more consistent service delivery among the local workforce areas? And number 2, is there a need for any additional state policy or guidance to help local boards establish consistent governance and delivery of service? So with the availability or ability to meet contractual obligations, we broke down the best practices in the state and the areas of needed improvement. Best practices that we found were that local boards that had the best outcomes have clearly defined agreements between and or separate contracts with the one-stop operator and the career service provider. The law requires that you have a written agreement that says there's a difference, there's a firewall between your one-stop operator and career service provider, and each knows their roles and responsibilities. We found that not all local areas had that specific agreement, but we had some areas that had separate contracts, and you'll see more about that in the upcoming slides. But other best practice, monthly monitoring allows all the local boards to ensure that subcontractors are meeting obligations. And we had several areas that we noted as best practice boards for monitoring, specifically in program and in fiscal monitoring. Areas of needed improvement were concerned that the one-stop operator role has not been clearly communicated or is receiving mixed levels of expectation from respective LWDAs. Had a great conversation with the executive directors yesterday, and one thing that we are intended to do at the state level is to ensure that we further clarify the one-stop operator roles, because this tends to still be across the state. There still seems to be some misunderstanding about what the one-stop operator should be doing, and that is from a functional capacity of managing not only the Title I, but the Title II, III, and IV staff, as well as TANF and other required partners. So there's some additional work we need to do from that standpoint. Budget management at the career service provider level is negatively impacting service due to inconsistent local monitoring, oversight, and reporting to the local board. As far as determining risk, best practices we saw is that local areas combine effort to address the one-stop operator and CSP, staffing and training plans, case management practices. There were some best practices there, invoicing procedures, and other operational strategies that were occurring across the state. That what we'll do is take those best practices and share those with your other areas that may need some improvement there. Areas of needed improvement. Understanding of basic case management is lacking, possibly due to the amount of staff turnover. We heard that multiple times with our executive directors yesterday, that in a lot of instances you have staff that come and go on the one-stop operator and or the career service provider level, and it's just not every day that you have someone walk in and understand the workforce system as a whole on their first day of the work. It takes a little time to get to know that workforce system and be able to provide effective case management. And then untimely or lack of data entry. And some of that, it's reflected in what Ivan's presentation shows as well. If there's untimely entry, then that can impact the reports that are given out to the state board and or local boards, either from a programmatic standpoint and or a fiscal standpoint. And then late payments to vendors and participants. That was an area of needed improvement. So, capacity to serve. Some of the best practices we saw in the state were developed onboarding procedures for one-stop operators and career service providers. Define roles with separate agreements between one-stop operators and career service providers. As I stated earlier, when they had a defined role, we saw that the service delivery was much better. The management under those American Job Centers was better. The career service providers with several years of experience provide better outcomes, as I mentioned on the last slide. Areas of needed improvement. You had mixed directives from LWDAs who had the same one-stop operator or career service provider. So in one case, we have one service provider who's in 5 different areas, and or actually 6 areas. And with that, they're not all operating the same because they're getting mixed directives on that. So the state's going to try its best to ensure that we develop a more consistent way of how do you deliver those services and get those directives consistent. Another native improvement was one-stop operators are not consistently providing functional management of the one-stop system. In some cases, the one-stop operator and the career service provider are working in the same capacity, which impacts the ability to manage partners. We've seen it through a little bit of a secret shopping here or there. We might go in one day and see someone operating as a career service provider, walk in the next day, and they're the one-stop operator. You don't have a clear, defined firewall there, and our intent is to ensure that we make that distinct separation. Okay, and under roles and responsibilities, mentioned this earlier, that the best practices in the state is to separate the OSO and the career service provider because it appears to create less confusion regarding the assigned role, and it also establishes that firewall. So as noted here, we have a couple of areas that have procured separately already, providing that natural firewall. So they procured a one-stop operator and then they turn around and their career service providers are procured separately. We know that's the intent of several of the other local areas. We've had discussions with them, and the executive directors seem to be well on board about making this move, and this will come in the state considerations. Areas of needed improvement, there are majority of the areas are out of compliance with federal law in regards to those firewalls provisions that I've been mentioning, and it's either tied to that lack of a written agreement and or the way that they're functionally putting out how these one-stop operators should function and how those career service providers should function. And service coverage in the local areas, we want to ensure that in those county areas that everyone's being served in counties. One way that we're looking to facilitate this, you're going to hear a lot more about the Virtual American Job Center. I won't go into detail with the Virtual American Job Center other than the fact that we've got a team that's working on that. We got through phase one. I think Keith made some announcements about that. Keith Rogers presented that in the Innovations Committee this morning. The intent is that we will be working with the likes of vocational rehabilitation and adult education and partners in the American Job Centers to ensure that those folks that aren't walking through the American Job Centers into the brick and mortar, that we can reach out to them online. So more about that in the next board meeting. But so service coverage goals by county are outlined in the OSO contracts. That makes for a best practice outcome for these local areas. They track service by county, and they're reported in their local board meetings. So, you know, if there's a county that's missing data, those local boards are being engaged in being able to ask, why are we not serving in these counties? The American Job Centers located in each county either are through a comprehensive affiliate, a specialized, or an access point. I don't mean to put any one area on the spot, but we're also hearing word about how Greater Memphis is actually looking to increase the number of access points out there. And so there are multiple ways that they can get out there to the county. So the area need of improvement, the services are available in all counties, but inadequate or lack of staffing prohibits the consistent service delivery. That we'll have to work with in technical assistance opportunities with the staff, how they're working with partners, and how they're getting those consistent service delivery. And so in most of the inconsistent service delivery is happening in the rural counties because you just do not have the qualified or the long-term experienced staff in those counties. So considerations. So I said the two questions I wanted the state board to consider, and as a state staff, we pulled together some bullet points as to where we think it would be beneficial to move forward. The first question is, where may there be some opportunities for adopting statewide practices to ensure more consistent service delivery and compliance among the local areas? One would be establish a comprehensive statewide monitoring guide to be utilized by all local areas. Currently, we have 9 local areas. They all have different monitoring guides. Our intent would be to have one monitoring guide, and everybody utilizes that guide. Any additional things that they need to monitor at the local level, they could add to the guide, and so that would be a consideration that we would take into account. Sharing best practices of technical assistance provided to the OSO and CSP. We want to commend the areas that went together and actually met with one of the service providers, brought those issues that needed to be addressed and those things that were working. That in itself was a best practice. And those type of groups that come together like that and focus on the task at hand, it's going to make a world of difference. So that in itself was a great technical assistance opportunity where 5 local areas came together and addressed some of those issues, and it looks like it's going to make some positive traction there. And then statewide systems training to include case management training. That will be sometime in probably mid-April or so. We're looking at potential for the full statewide systems training. And of course, we will have case management training in that. You'll also be hearing in the days to come about learning management system and how we're going to look at certifying our staff not only within the workforce services division, but also across the state in our contracts. We want to be able to say that we've got case managers that are certified and actually learning and knowing how to case manage, knowing how to be fiscally responsible by passing a fiscal certification and so forth. So is there a need for any additional state policy or guidance to help local boards establish consistent processes? This is where we would ask you as a state board to sort of be behind this effort, and we've also had the conversation with the local executive directors. But we are currently drafting a revision of the procurement policy that will ensure the clear expectations and duties of the firewall's provisions. In addition to that, we'll take the policy to ensure diversification of career service providers with experience, because we tend to lock in on one career service provider that can do everything, but there are multiple nonprofits out there, there are multiple agencies that can do that business. Sometimes not as easy in the rural areas, but our intent as a state staff is to help the rural areas ensure that they have the right service provider to provide all those services. So with that, really, we're saying we would like to recommend to the board in June a revised procurement policy that will basically take the one-stop operator and the career service provider and mandate that the local areas are procuring the one-stop operator separate from the career service provider. So that's really all I have in my presentation, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Questions for James? Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. I just have more of a comment, Mr. Roberson. I commend and look forward to the rollout of the virtual AJC. I think it's going to be great. And I'm also thankful to see the graphic that we've seen a couple of times of how all the state agencies are working together.
Yes, sir.
But until we come up with a solution statewide on the accessibility of broadband in both cities and counties, the virtual AJC is not going to be helpful. And I haven't heard that in the discussion today, and just wanted to inject that. Thank you.
And one thing I would say about that is even in these access points, which are like your libraries and your high schools and that kind of thing, you know, what we're asking is that the local areas be as innovative and creative about how do you get to these individuals that are not walking through your doors, and knowing that there may not be broadband in their homes. And I certainly can't speak to the statewide broadband issue, but where can we make sure that they can be engaged? If it's a public library is closer to them than a American Job Center, why not? We've got to reach out to them and say, public library is there. We can reach out and have discussions with you from a virtual reality standpoint. And so, yeah, so I don't know.
Comments?
If I could just add to the question posed by Mayor Brooks, one of the things that we'll continue to look for ways to sort of leverage these services is that, you know, I look across the table at my partners from Department of Human Services who has a footprint in all 95 counties. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are places, there are locations that can physically provide services that we need to come alongside. It doesn't always have to be the creation of these opportunities just for our program. So how can we truly have a no wrong door and make it more than just a cliche? So if someone goes into Department of Human Services for one need, they should be able, and it's reasonable for that citizen to expect that I can get career services there as well. So those are one of the things that we'll continue to look. Again, it won't solve, sorry, we're having some microphone issues today. It won't solve all of our problems. Yeah, but at least it's a start, Mayor Brooks. So that's really what we want to focus on, to how to leverage existing infrastructure. Because you know, certainly I don't want to speak for Mandy, but as opposed to Department of Human Services have to share the load alone, why not bring over our resources and help reduce costs for all agencies and then expand our full service offering? So those are some of the things that are on the horizon.
And to the broadband, I think leveraging existing infrastructure makes sense. But to the broadband issue, there's additional funds in the governor's budget to make sure that remains a focus, not just for our virtual AJC, but for ECD's ability to attract economic opportunity. And so hear you loud and clear.
If I can add, we have the broadband division is in ECD, and I'd be happy to talk to my teammates and see if they wanted to come and give a presentation on broadband and where it is and where it's going and how it's being funded and all that great stuff if the committee wishes.
Yeah.
If I may,
Steve, go ahead.
If I may, I would like to add that there's a captive audience at the high school level and at the TCAT and the community college level as well. I think, leveraging it makes sense, but using what structure we already have, infrastructure we already have at the high school level and the community college TCAT would be a great leverage point for this conversation for AJCs and for advisement, career advisement just in general. I know, Dr. Lovett, you discussed Campbell Strong yesterday in the meeting that we were in. I think that, there's another opportunity to engage those members of the military before they're leaving, that captive audience as well with the AJC and with the virtual AJC. I'm excited about it.
Job Center. He just went on this list. You all can do it within your own means. All you got to do is do it.
All right, James, thank you. All right, and so now for the guru of all things financial, Ivan Greenfield.
Testing. Yeah, good. Good afternoon, and thank you, Chairman Berry. Now I got that high expectation, as my deputy pointed out here. So what we're going to do today is I just want to point out that this should be in your packet on the left side. I think it's the last one in the back there. And so all of these figures that we'll discuss this afternoon relate to our workforce services program and are as of our end of second quarter, December 2019. And so just kind of we're going to go and look at quarter-on-quarter changes in the budgets and our year-to-date cost, again, as of December 2019. We'll look at some costs specific to direct participants. We'll look at some utilization rates around those fundings that went out to the local areas specific to those participant costs. And then finally, we'll conclude with just some comments around next year's budget. And I'm going to try and use this little beam thing here to kind of help indicate. So this slide here just reflects all of our programs, what our authorized funding was from the USDOL ETA for those programs. And then you see here that in this second quarter, we had no additional programs added, but our SNAP program increased by about $3.8 million. SNAP is an interagency agreement with DHS, and that interagency agreement was amended to include that 3.4 and 482,000 in match and supportive services. In our cost categories, quarter on quarter, you see that year to date we expended or about 34 million. Quarter on quarter, you see an increase of 10 million. The bulk of that 10 million being between what we're seeing here is grants and subsidies, which reflect our contracted services. When you look at that 34 million, 12.7 or 12.7 million or 37.5% was what was expended at the state level, and then that 21.2 or 62.5% is expended in our contracted services. And so of that 21.2 million, you see that 19.6 was expended in support of our Title I programs, our WIOA programs, adult, youth, and dislocated worker. And then of that 19.6 million, you'll see that my red dot is...
Ivan, you're going too fast for me.
Sorry?
You're going too fast for me. Give me, yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. So of that 19.6 million, that was in support of WIOA services. 16.8 of that was in programmatic cost, and 8.3 million of that was in those actual services delivered to participants. And so we have I'm sorry, I should be using this. We have a state minimum participant rate that says that at least 40% of program costs should be expended on direct services to participants, so that you see in each of the quarters that was being met. But also you would note that comparing year to date to last year's overall totals, you'll see that year to date is running about a third. If we're looking at half of the year, it's about a third of the overall cost for participant costs, and similarly for the overall cost to programs. So that programmatic costs are down, and in discussions with our executive directors over the local areas, they attributed to that drop in cost to the adding of additional funding sources like TN Promise. And so we'll continue to monitor that, also encouraging them to utilize the dollars to help with supportive services or other things of that nature to aid in that or to rectify that drop in expenditures. Overall, we see that our enrollments are up about 17% quarter on quarter, and based on expenditures of 16.8 and overall enrollments of 11,775, we're showing a cost per participant of just over $1,400. So these are the utilization rates that I talked about earlier. So just to note, mention that MPCR, you see that we have one area that is not currently at that. We had a robust discussion in the earlier oversight committee around some timing issues of the data getting in, and this is a hostage of that timing situation. And so we're working to get that, working with the local area to get that corrected. Over here in minimum, in 80 under WIOA, we have a 80% expenditure obligation, and we also have a similar policy at the state in which local areas have to expend their 80%, obligate 80% of their first year funding. And so those areas not meeting it, when you see here 100%, that means that they met the 80%, and then these are, up to 80%. So in this case, 91.3% of the 80% was obligated. And so what you're seeing here is that based on these current utilization rates, if it were June 30th of this year, there's a potential recapture of $6.4 million. The other rates are, just kind of specific to like youth, in school, out of school, work experience on youth, and you see that those are being met currently by all 9 areas. So just some quick comments about next year's budget. Overall, ETA's budget at the national level, this first one is at the national level, was down about 7%. That was really reflected in the dislocated worker appropriations. The other workforce services programs, their allocations were pretty flat year on year. I put in that migrant season farm worker and our senior citizens, senior community program. For 2 years running, they have been initially zeroed out in the budget, but have been now funded for next year. And as you've all heard, at the national level as well, there's emphasis on apprenticeship. They've increased that to $200 million. Last year was $160 million, or this year was $160 million. Next year it'll be $200 million. And also on our RESEA program, they've increased that to $200 million, up from $117 million this year. And so that program is expected to triple in size by 2025, again, showing that there's a real emphasis across the nation in growing those 2 programs. From a state perspective, they mentioned last week at the NASWA convention, that our funding TEGL, our allocation TEGL, which indicates what the states are receiving as far as their award and allocations, will not be out until April. And what that does for us is kind of pushes back. Ordinarily, in this February meeting, we would have a review and approval of our state reserve funding budget, but that'll be pushed back to our June meeting as once we receive that TEGL. And then also to speak about, economic conditions for us are similar to what they were last year. Last year, our funding took about an 8% hit, which equated to about $4 million in our Title I programs. That means that it's likely we'll see a decrease in our next year funding because conditions are, we have low unemployment and the such. And so we anticipate that there'll be maybe not to the same 8% or $4 million, but that there will be a decrease in our program year 20, fiscal year 21 funding. That's that. Oh, here comes the question.
Questions?
I have a question for you, Ivan.
Yes, sir.
I'm a bit of an old dog trying to learn some new tricks here. I'm really accustomed to looking at financials for a corporation in terms of a financial statement, P&L, a balance sheet. It's taken me, I'll have to admit, a couple of meetings to get used to what these numbers mean to me. I'm still not really there yet. Okay. So one, I wonder if there's not a way for us to have some sort of session at some point, maybe to deep dive into this and actually understand what you're trying to present, because it's quite frankly, it still doesn't quite click sometimes for me. So I'd really love to have a chance to actually get into this a bit with you a little bit more. And then I wonder, is there not a way to look at this in the same way that I'm used to looking at a company? Is there not a financial statement and a balance sheet view of this data that looks more like we would traditionally analyze a publicly traded company or something?
I think we could come up with something to mirror that.
Yeah. I'm beginning to get it, but I'm still missing some pieces about how do I see this time. It's not clear to me that I'm looking at the same data from last time as I am this time. And it might be, but it's just not real clear to me yet.
Marshall, that's not a unique problem to you.
Okay.
No, absolutely. And the slide hasn't changed, just the data. The first slide I didn't project it out over multiple periods, but absolutely, we can do some sort of P&L or financial statement that the assets are really just grants, authorized funding, but I can translate that and be happy to have further sessions.
I agree, just to see that year-over-year comparison, the actual compared to the budget, the gap, the variance, all that.
Hey, Ivan, quick question. I assume we're through halfway through our fiscal year, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so we've spent 33 or almost 34 of 84. Is that, I'm interpreting that correctly? Yeah. And so in terms of, that's, back to Marshall's point, that's a little different in that, but that reflects activity and applied services and utilization of funds in a productive way. So that's not 50%, yet we're 50% through the year.
That's correct.
Yeah, and so there's some, you had questions and concerns on your circle there at the end. Yeah, right up there, the green one. Is that a concern that we should be aware of?
Right, that's what I was, my comment was specific to Title I dollars, and so I had mentioned that of the 21 million, that's our biggest bulk that goes out in contracted services, that only 16 million of that was on programmatic costs, which was in essence running about a third, if you remember that slide. So program costs are down. We do recognize that. And again, addressing that with some of the local areas, they thought that it was because like TN Promises takes up some of the tuition costs, and so they wouldn't incur that cost. And so that's why costs are down. Let me go back. So you're referring to this first slide, second slide, right here.
Correct.
So, 33, but in that 33, the bulk of that is this $21.2 million in our contracted services, right? Everything else is kind of administrative. There's some other contracted services in one or two other programs, but the bulk of that is out to the local areas.
So Ivan, if we do not spend that money, what happens to that money?
Then that's the potential recapture that we were talking about at the state level So there's, I identified what would be at the local area level, but if we do not spend,
And if the state recaptures that from the local areas, what happens to that money?
well, so after 2 years, any unobligated funds comes back to the state. The state has the money for 3 years, and so they have a year to.
So what happens, Stuart, is if the local doesn't spend it, we get it, and we have 3 years to spend it on something. And so.
1 year, I'm sorry.
Excuse me, 1 year to spend it on, so it's a total of 3 years to figure out where to spend it. And so the question that would be, if Tennessee Promise is taking that, are we looking at where else that could be beneficial in the regions? And so can somebody speak to that?
We are.
So traditionally, when we have recapture, we've reallocated the money out for specific initiatives that the board has expressed as a priority. So for example, when we put out regional funds, when we put out the initial apprenticeship expansion dollars, all that came as a result of the state recapture to allocate the money out. Now, I will tell you the challenge is this. If the locals have not been able to expend the money for 2 years, it's very difficult to then put the money back out for a year to have it expended. That puts additional pressure on our local boards, and it puts additional pressure on us as a state. So the consideration has been, and I believe we're going to require this after we get our funding TEGL, is to require a budget that goes into greater detail of how the money will be spent so that we can have a better opportunity to project where the money needs to go. Remember, as far as we go, we can only put money out to the local boards. And so this is our mechanism for getting the money moved. As we continue to go down this path, and I know Dr. Lovett is there, we will also be looking for ways to seed other organizations who are doing like work. It doesn't mean that we won't fulfill our obligation to local boards, but the challenge we have at the state level, when we look at the projected FY21 budget, the president's budget, we got an early look at that when we were in DC last week. We know that the more this money gets unutilized, it sends a very strong message in the states that we don't need it, and that's not the direction we want to go. So we'll continue to work with this body to look at ways that we can, one, build capacity on organizations who are doing like work, and continue to provide opportunities and greater opportunities to resource our local boards. So, so to answer your question in short, it's a challenge to do something in a year that you've not really done over that entire period. But we have looked for ways to reinvest the dollars, and we'll have to continue to get creative on that. The goal is always to get the dollars expended, not just for money's sake, but to meet a real need. We want to actually serve participants. What we're finding is even though those costs are down because of things like Tennessee Reconnect and Promise, which is a great problem to have in a state, by the way, the sort of the other side of that is that when we're working with high-need populations, there tends to be an additional cost per participant, which is why we've emphasized being able to serve priority populations who are going to need more than just books. They're going to need daycare. They're going to need transportation. There's a bevy of things that come along with that. So as we continue to look for this new strategy on how we can get dollars moved and participants served, we're going to really have to put renewed focus on those groups who are not able to take advantage of programs like Reconnect and Promise. And so we'll certainly continue to look for leadership and recommendations from this board in ways to get that done. This money has a lot of strings attached, so we don't have the flexibility to just sort of stand up new programs, but we do have some opportunity in the innovation space, and we're not afraid to ask for waivers. And this board has supported us in that. And so if there's a challenge, we're certainly committed to asking for a federal allowance as well if there's something of emphasis to this board.
Yes, thank you, Denise. Also, we are monitoring these dollars closely, right? We have implemented a finance committee. We've been partnering with other agencies like education to really move the dollars to support other initiatives, CTE and things of that nature, work-based learning. And so, yes, spending is down, but we're looking at how we can better utilize funds for other initiatives, utilize these funds for other initiatives. So,
and well, just one follow-up for practical purposes. Then you're not presenting. Obviously, we're on a pace that will have some excess funds if we continue on this pace, right? That will go into this bucket after 2 years. So I'm sitting here thinking, well, gee, I wonder how big the bucket is right now. But when that transfer, that event happens, then it's out of our, you're not presenting it, so I assume it's out of our management purview at that point? Someone else is managing those funds, or am I incorrect on that?
No, sir, that's the, Denise, I'm sorry. She had mentioned about the state reserve budget. That's the budget that we're going to be presenting. Once we know what our current this coming year's allocation will be, then we will present in June that budget. That budget will say this is where our state reserve dollars are. If you recall, we had allocated about $18 million that had specific funding, right? And so some of that went to 3.3 went to the rural initiative and other things. And so we'll present that budget so you'll know exactly where we are on those carry-in funds, if you will, in our June meeting.
So I'm just going to say this for my own clarity, but obviously the best case scenario is for the regions to be able to spend it like it was intended, right? If not, we're going to be presenting this budget that we'll get to have some input on, but we're not. It's not going to be a surprise. We're going to have this allocated toward programming that this board has already said this is what we're in support of. These are the kinds of things we like, and so as it's presented to us, we should be pretty pleased with what we see because it's going to go to those programs that are working well, right? Okay.
Thank you.
How do you all think is the best way to make sure that the local boards know that in time to make sure that they have time to think and to plan where that money could be spent? Because again, not knowing, and I'm not sure sometimes, when you go for an hour and you have lunch during that time, how much time that the board actually goes away with, how much knowledge of that the dollars may be out there to get it back to the local levels. Because I can think of any numerous of things, the way that money could be spent, but I won't bore you with that. I think it's going to be important to get it back to the board itself and let them know what's out there.
So the numbers that we report here are reported up to us from the local boards. So they know where they are on their spending. And the fact, when we send out this next year's allocation, we'll also be requesting budgets from them so that we can also track based on what they told us they were going to be spending it on as a second measure, if you will. But they know month to month where they are in their expenditures and what they have remaining.
Other questions?
Your federal slide, it says 200 million for apprenticeship. How does that translate down to Tennessee?
So what will likely happen is at some point the feds will issue a funding opportunity announcement, which states will apply for additional funds of that $200 million pot.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Moving on. Okay, so we need to hear from the committee meetings that happened earlier. I know that Ann Hatcher had to step out, and she let me know that. And so, Michelle, you're going to fill us in from that committee.
I'll try. All right, so very briefly, BR presented updates and provided us with some expenditures, so we appreciate those, Joel. Just making sure that we're in the right track on those, and it looks like it. Very, very good information. Ms. Christine was very excited about it. When it comes to adult education, we talked about what was just presented about how we're being slow in spending those monies, but there is a plan. So he just updated us on what they're trying to accomplish. So that looked great. I'm also happy to report that there has been a lot of improvement in the report errors. So it's looking a lot better. When it comes to reconciliation, I think we all can come into agreement that we have that integrations issue. So when it comes to that, we're just looking for ways to improve that. I asked the question, are we going to be here next June? And it's yes, the answer was yes, but they're always looking for ways to improve that. So I think we're in the right path. So now we do have 3 policies that we need vote from the board members. I am going to ask for Ivan to just give a brief executive summary and to help us to pass those policies, please.
I'll speak to one as it's fiscal in nature, and then I'm going to put our Program Integrity Director on the line to answer to the other 2. So the first policy is our cost allocation, allocation methodology, which speaks to the funding that we receive from the feds every year. And so what we're asking in there, 90% of the policy, I don't know if we can put it up on the board, but it's in your package. Let me just, it's in your package on the right side. And so the first couple of pages is straight from WIOA as far as the mandatory allocations on our adult, youth, and dislocated worker dollars. On page 3, section 5, the paragraph beginning with WIOA Title I formula allotments is new, and it relates to on our dislocated worker, there are weighted factors that determine how much a local area will receive in funding, right? So some of those factors, if you want to turn to this last page, this last page, attachment 3, shows those factors. So across the top in the green, not to get too far down in the weeds, but so that you have a clear picture of what we're asking. Of our dislocated worker allocation, you see $13.6 million. It gets allocated based on these factors: unemployment in the area, UI claims in the area, long terms, and so forth across those 5. And so economic conditions change year to year. And so we're saying that those weights should more be in line with what those economic conditions are. So if an area is experiencing high plant closures or declining industries, then they should have additional, more of the pie to address that issue. So what we're asking is each year before allocation ticket, once we receive that, we will pump before the oversight committee to recommendations around what those factors should be. And then that will be presented to the board for review and approval. And then also the other side of that is discretionary allocation under youth and adult of 30%. We don't currently have that, but if we were to present that, it would also be presented in that presentation to the board coming up in June. And so what we're asking here is for board approval on discretionary, the discretionary allocation, on the changing of the bases according to economic conditions. And then the last thing in there is that in an emergent situation, say a disaster or massive layoff, plant closure, that the Assistant Commissioner of Workforce Services has the discretionary authority to adjust these factors to remedy that issue.
So the way that we heard it was give them the flexibility to allocate the money where it's needed. So therefore, I'm moving forward to, anybody can, wants to move forward that vote? If there's not any questions?
If it's okay, can we go ahead and hear all 3 policies and make one vote?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
All right, thank you. So the next 2 policies, the first one is the interlocal and partnership agreements. So there is an executive summary there for you on the next 2, if you want to read through, do brief review of that. This policy, it currently is a guidance, and we are converting it to a policy because there are requirements of the local areas to complete these 2 agreements. The interlocal agreement is agreement amongst the county mayors that they must do every 2 years. This policy lays out what those requirements are in that agreement. What this agreement mainly does is establishes the CLEO, or the chief local elected official, and it establishes the fiscal agent for these local areas. And then the partnership agreement, it is agreement between the CLEO and the local board chair, and establishes what the requirements are for the local board and how meetings will be conducted and how communication will be conducted amongst the CLEO and the local board chair. Any questions on that particular policy? All right. The second one is a policy on local governance. This is kind of split into 5 parts. Those 5 parts are the bylaws, conflict of interest, board nomination process, the local board certification process to include recertification and decertification of the boards, and board meeting access and what's required there. Bylaws are pretty self-explanatory. It establishes what are required within those bylaws. Conflict of interest requires that all board members do sign a conflict of interest, and if there is a potential conflict of interest between them and board activity, that they make that known and they recuse themselves from any action taken there. The board nomination process establishes directly from WIOA that how the boards need to be established at the local level, which includes a majority business. The certification section just lays out the requirements to recertify the boards every 2 years, and the governor's ability to decertify a board if it comes to needing that. And lastly is the board meeting access section, which requires the local boards to post any meeting minutes or any business that's conducted available for the public to view, which would be on their websites. We did add a part in there that they also include their rosters along with their meeting minutes, their board rosters, so that the public can know who is participating in these boards and what they're voting on.
Okay, any questions about the policies that have been presented from the Oversight Committee?
On this question of discretionary spending, I haven't read through this, so I apologize. I'm accustomed to having some sort of limitation to that, up to a certain percentage or up to a certain dollars. Is that in here somewhere?
It's within the allocation itself.
Yeah.
So the allocations, the feds stipulate what each program will receive by state.
Okay.
So you can't exceed that.
Okay.
So again, in that example, the dislocated worker allocation was $13.6 million. That gets allocated to the 9 areas based on the data that was reflected there. But that 13 doesn't change.
But as
That's the
far as the
distribution to the
capacity of the executive to change that, I mean, is there some, against what we budgeted, is there some stop gap to not go beyond a certain point without an approval of the board, or is there some kind of?
So ordinarily, there would be the approval by the board to change those factors, but we're saying in an emergency situation, there may be a sense of urgency there to move on it quicker.
Yeah.
And so that's.
Ivan, I think the
very
question is, is there a percentage within that flexibility? So can I move all $3.6 million, or do I have a percentage of that? I can move up to 20% of that allocation, or that's the question.
Without approval or something?
Without
right?
approval.
I can get a check of a certain size signed by myself, but I can't sign one greater than that without another signature or
So
something along those lines?
because is it up to 100% that I can have that flexibility, or is it up to a certain percentage lower? That's the question.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is, and maybe the way the dislocated worker allocation is set up, we're talking about a finite number. The thing that changes is the distribution between the areas, right?
Right.
So are you saying that a local area should not exceed, or the change in the amount to a local area should not exceed this amount or that amount?
I think we would be surprised if we showed up one day and someone declared an emergency and moved all the money from one place to another. I think we would be surprised. So I think there's probably some level at which discretionary movement is acceptable, and there's usually some level at which one would seek approval from their
now
team.
I understand you. So as opposed to, we're looking at those factors of 0.3, 0.3, so there's a limitation in the degree of degree of variation between those factors. Is that?
Well, yeah, again, if there's $1 in every area and however an emergency was declared, if I was allowed to move all the dollars to another area, I think we would be surprised. So I just wonder if there's not some backstop to the discretion.
That's a great point.
So Marshall, if I may add, so the amounts that are listed for the allocation, those amounts would be set based on the weights. There's a 30% discretionary piece that we're talking about of this money. So of that 30%, if there were, and this is a truly worst-case scenario, we are responsible as an agency to send out the warn notices, so a company notifies us if there's a layoff. So if in one certain area, if there was a mass layoff of a company that employed several thousand people, it would really send a jolt throughout that local area. So within that 30%, it would allow the assistant commissioner to get money to that local area within that 30% to help them retrain or get services to those individuals who are impacted by that layoff. So we're really talking about the 30% piece within that. But I also hear you saying about checks and balances, which is very important to us and important to this board. So when that decision is made, if there is a mass layoff, we can refine the parameters for that and send that out prior to the actual contract of the money being moved. And so I think we probably need to flesh out that 30% a little bit more just to provide some additional details and draft scenarios, and we can do that if it meets the approval of the board chairman, if there needs to be additional consideration for the policy.
Let me try too. It's 30%. Yeah, it's 30%. Because we're just talking about the discretionary. So of that 16.8, the discretionary is 30, and you can only spend up to 30% of that. But you can spend 100% of that 30% if you want to. So what do you think about that?
But within that 30, are we asking for, we want to make sure too, are we asking for additional consideration? So even though it's 30%, it sounds like you're still wanting some checks and balances to make sure that 30% doesn't just go to one area. So do we need to further refine that, or are you okay with that?
I just think people would be surprised if there was some mass reallocation, and so there's just some backstop. If the backstop's 30%, I'm okay with that. I'm just wondering what that level is.
And so for what it's worth, I'm comfortable with 30%. I'm comfortable with discretion of you have 30%, and if we showed up and basically have discretionary, and it's called discretionary, and if we ended up, and I don't really see that necessarily, but we ended up spending the discretionary on one particular, everybody else's allocation is still the same. We're not taking the allocations, but we have what we can do is spend that discretionary money at Kenyatta's discretion. That's basically what we're asking.
Thank you.
I appreciate the clarification. Thank you. Other questions? All right, so I'll entertain a motion to accept the policy changes as presented by the Oversight Committee. Martha, thank you. Second?
Second, Bill Godwin.
Second, Bill, thank you. Any further discussion?
Chairman, if I may, so in addition to that, we will make a modification before the final policy is set that even though the assistant commissioner will have the discretion for the 30%, it will be also subject to the commissioner's approval.
Okay, so I'm going to say that the motion that was made will be as presented with the additional request of the additional approval of the commissioner on that discretionary funds. Good with the first, with the motion and second on that? All in favor of those policies with that additional comment and approval by the commissioner? Everybody say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Those policy changes are passed. Okay, so Stuart, you want to take us through the Operations Committee?
Yes, thank you. We had an outstanding meeting to begin with. I opened up just to express my gratitude to Assistant Commissioner Lovett and Deputy Commissioner Thomas for hosting me. That was an outstanding experience, and I echo everything that the Assistant Commissioner shared earlier. It's very worthwhile. We opened up with Carla Garrett covering findings from the August Federal Monitoring Report with responses and progress taken from local and state staff to address the findings by June of 2020. Just to give some further clarification, during the period of August 12th through September 6th, the U.S. Department of Labor, Employment, and Training Administration conducted an on-site compliance review for the Title I Youth Program. The review covered policies, guidance, procedures, and knowledge of state staff and local workforce development area staff in 3 of the local areas. The state received the final monitoring report dated November 15th, which identified 15 findings, 6 concerns, 1 promising practice in Tennessee. Attached was the state's response, and Carla went through each of the 15 findings and explained them in great detail to the satisfaction of the committee. The agency also has partnered with the Department of Education to offer local education and workforce agencies 2 grant opportunities to expand work-based learning opportunities for youth and support career exploration events to expose youth as young as middle school to high-wage industries and occupations in their region. So thank you to Carla Garrett. Ian White provided the committee the Adult Education Federal Monitoring Report findings with the responses and actions to be taken from local and staff. He provided an update on the performance of local adult education providers, and he has this outlined in a spreadsheet with progress dates, due dates, and so they're using that as a management tool to complete their response to the findings. Ben Pacino provided the committee with an update on KPI measures that have been established and are being vetted out in real-world practice to make sure that they're relevant and useful by the committee in November 19 when we brought up the need for that. He's negotiated targets for regions and local areas, and this information can be found in your packets. So there's no vote on our committee. Thank you.
All right, any questions for Stuart? Okay. Marshall, why don't you give us an update on the Innovations Committee? And thank you, by the way, for being the active chair on that committee today.
Thank you. I'm honored to be acting this time and chair. We don't often talk about committee work as exciting, but I think our committee actually has some very exciting work going on. And we had John Dillman from SAS, which is a data analytics company, and they are developing a labor market information report that will be available to, from what I understand, everyone in the state and outside through workforcetn.gov on March 1st. And this is an interactive data analytics tool that provides economic trends, wage data, and various other aspects of our state. It's very nice looking and it's extremely informational, and I think we would all enjoy seeing it. So we appreciated that presentation. We had Keith Rogers and the team from the Virtual American Job Center program. Keith had presented once before in their trial. They've moved that forward. They're actually providing what I would consider like live support on jobs for TN. They have adopted some best practices from industry software, and they're engaging individuals when they land on jobs for TN. Again, very interesting technology that they're using, and I think we'll see some really interesting results from that. He was able to provide us with some data in terms of the number of people that they'd engaged, the conversations that they had. Very, very interesting, and I think we've already heard some folks say they're going to expand those services to provide support really for our other partners through the Virtual American Job Center. That's a very exciting development. Charles Bryson and Rebecca Vernon from TANF, Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, came in and presented on some of their initiatives. I think that really one of the most interesting things is they have an MOU in place with the American Job Centers to provide a more realigned set of services. And one of the metrics that they presented was the reduction in wait time that they've been able to provide to folks. So they're really trying to enhance their services delivery for folks, especially by reducing wait time that people have to go through when they engage their program. There's some challenges there in terms of the amount of data that they have available in terms of the impact of their programs, and they're working towards delivering some more information on that. We had Tyra Kopus, who's the director of our apprenticeship program. That was mentioned earlier. At least Kevin and I believe that we should have Tyra come and present to the whole board. That's an interesting and emerging new program for us. They've recently launched the Apprenticeship TN website. The numbers are outstanding in terms of the improvement in that program, the number of individuals, the number of programs. Tyra had presented to us once before. She's only been on her job for a very short period of time, less than a year. And we've seen some really interesting improvements just since her original presentation, and we were really appreciative of her presentation. And we have no actions before the committee, so thank you, sir.
All right, any questions for Marshall? Okay. Well, I appreciate everybody's patience. I know we ran a little long, but we did that because of the engagement of the team. And thank you for good questions and good conversation. I thought it was productive. We got some good answers out of it. Thank you to all the contributors who presented today and the good information. I want to remind a few folks of some dates. The WIOA partners have a meeting, a work group meeting coming up March 19th. Don't forget the Tennessee Workforce Leaders Summit on March 23rd. Would love for the board members to be present at that if you can. And then our next board meeting is June 5th. So make sure you have that on your calendar appropriately. I'm not even going to ask for other comments because I know everybody's hungry. So we'll consider this meeting adjourned. Thanks for everyone's participation.